Imagine a room where everyone whispers and no one breathes. The air smells like wax and wool, ink and worry. The king is laughing too loudly. The queen is smiling too softly. And behind the curtains, a maid folds linen as if the fabric can hear. Secrets. Her name is Fredegund. She was not born rich. She was not born royal. But she was born with the one skill that beats both. The ability to read a room before the room reads her. Fredegund serves Queen Ordovera, wife to King Chilperic I of Neustria. He is a Merovingian king, restless and proud, the kind of man who sees a locked door and calls it an insult. His court is loud with gold and quiet with fear. Nobles trade smiles and daggers. Priests pretend not to notice. Servants learn to listen with their heads down. Fredegund does not keep her head down. She moves through the palace like a shadow that understands sunlight always present, never caught. She learns who drinks too much, who spends too much, who talks too much. She remembers which page delivers letters at midnight. She knows which guard looks away at the wrong time. She learns the king's patterns when he laughs, when he sulks, when he is hungry for praise. When he is hungry for anything else, no one watches a maid until it's too late. Chilperic's marriage is not built on trust. It's built on airs and insults. He has the temper of a summer storm and the patience of a winter wasp. Fredegund steps into this weather the way sailors step into a wind. She does not fight it. She angles her sails. How do you capture a king? Not with a net, not with a smile. With timing, Fredegund times her kindnesses like a musician hitting the beat exactly when the room expects a hush. She is near when the king needs to be flattered, far when he wants to be feared. She speaks plainly when others perform. She laughs when it costs her nothing and listens when it earns her everything. It doesn't take long, the king notices. Of course he does. Men like Chilperic always notice a calm voice in a storm. He starts to ask for the maid who knows where things are. Then he starts to ask for the maid who knows what people are. Then he stops asking and simply expects her shadow wherever his falls. Ordovera notices, too. A queen can smell smoke before. The rest of us see flame. But the court is built to make a queen polite about her own house fire. Ordovera can object, but objections from queens are only as strong as the king's appetite for guilt. Chilperic's appetite for guilt is small. A doorway closes. A corridor empties. The story writes itself. The maid becomes the royal favorite. The queen becomes the person who once was. Officially, there are reasons. Unofficially, there is Fredegund. Ordovera is sent away to a convent. The word convent sounds pious. In the 6th century, it is simply another kind of lock. Fredegund has not only stepped into the royal bed, she has stepped into a map of enemies. Chilperic, as if daring fate to flinch, seeks a new highborn wife, Galswintha, a Visigothic princess, sister to Brunhild. Galswintha comes with dignity, a powerful family, and a dowry of cities that make jealous men stare at dust as if they were counting coins in it. She also arrives with a clear request. Loyalty. It is not complicated. It is also not what Chilperic knows how to give. Fredegund does not leave the palace when Galswintha arrives. She fades back half step, no more. The king's eyes do their little traitor dance. Galswintha learns quickly that in Neustria, vows are decorations, not anchors. She complains. She pleads. She may even threaten to go home, and that, in palaces, is a more dangerous sentence than the word treason. Then it happens. The princess is found dead, strangled in her own bed. The room is careful, the floor remembers nothing. But rumor has a better memory than stone. It whispers one name until it becomes a shape in the dark. Fredegund. No one proves it. No one can. In courts like this, proof is the cheapest currency and the hardest thing to spend. Galswinther's death is not a private tragedy. It is a match held to oil. Her sister Brunhild is not a woman who forgives the weather for raining. She marries Sigebert I of Austrasia, Chilperic's brother, and declares a new climate. Between Brunhild and Fredegund, the air will never be safe again. Chilperic does what men like him always do when chased. He runs forward. He marries Fredegund. The servant has become the queen, and the court must pretend it never saw the broom in her hand. The halls are scrubbed of yesterday's truths. The singers adjust their lyrics. The scribes cut and stitch the story until it lies flat on the page. But queenship is not a dress. You cannot simply put it on. It must fit over bones that understand pressure. Fredegund understands pressure the way a knife understands a seam. She is not soft. She is not merciful. She is purposeful. She begins to clear the board. In a royal family, sons are blessings until they are threats. Stepsons are threats the moment they breathe. Fredegund watches, counts, prays in public, plans in private. Some boys are sent away for safety. Some grow quiet in monasteries, censured, shaved, unharmed in body, neutralized in value. One dies, another dies. People murmur about fever. People always murmur about fever and the rumors. The ugliest rumor sticks because it is both shocking and useful that Fredegund seduces her husband's sons. Is it true? Medieval gossip loves to mix sin with strategy. The fact is this: several stepsons end up dead, exiled, or broken. Whether the bed was ever part of the plan almost matters less than the fear that it could be. Fear does more work than soldiers when it moves first. The church notices. It is hard not to, when bishops keep learning that saying no near Fredegund makes the room colder. One bishop, Pretextatus of Rouen, refuses to flinch. He denounces, he writes, he resists. He is tried, exiled, and when he finally returns, he does not live long. People say he died in his church. People do not say Fredegund's name out loud when they say this. They don't have to. By now, the court is a school for survival. You learn what compliment to give, and which one to never consider. You learn that silence can be a crime if you are silent at the wrong joke. You learn to laugh when Fredegund laughs. You learn to lower your eyes when she stops. Because here is the truth: people never say on the record, the kingdom works. The grain arrives. The roads are safe enough. The taxes are predictable. Bandits vanish as if they made a mistake and robbed the wrong traveler. Fredegund rules like a woman who believes love is a fairy tale and fear is a contract. You can dislike the method and still admit the machine runs. But every machine has a cost. The cost is breath. People stop taking full ones when Fredegund is in the room. Mothers watch their sons more closely. Nobles count the number of doors in a hall before they agree to sit down. The king himself, loud, hungry, proud, begins to fade into the background of his own palace. He is not diminished as a person. He is simply less useful as a center. Fredegund is the gravity now, and somewhere in Austrasia, Brunhild sharpens her patience. The feud is not just two women with long memories. It is two strategies for power colliding across a map: assassins' bribes, marriages used like handshakes that hide knives. We will get there. For now, stand in this hallway with us, in the quiet between bells, and understand the moment. A maid has become a queen has become a storm, and a storm has become the climate. One night, torches lean in the wind. The king rides out to hunt. The dogs know his voice. The trees do not. Morning will bring a shock so large it will feel rehearsed. But that is a later chapter. Tonight, Fredegund kneels at a cradle. Inside is a baby with a name that will matter, Clotha. She smooths the blanket the way all mothers do. Then she stands the way not all mothers can, already calculating which men must be moved, which doors must be locked, which rumors must be fed. The cradle holds a future, the palace holds a fuse, and Fredegund has never been afraid of lighting. Things the news travelled on cold roads and colder tongues. Gals went the princess, sister, bride was dead, strangled in her own bed. The message reached Brunhild, the way thunder reaches a valley, late, heavy, and impossible to ignore. Brunhild did not wail. She did not faint. She placed her palm on the table where her sister's betrothal gifts had once been counted gold. Linen, pieces of a future, and she made a private promise. If the world would not give justice, she would teach the world how to spell the word dot in Austrasia. King Sigebert. I watched her with the careful respect a sensible man keeps for fire. He married her, and when he did, the map itself seemed to change. Color, two courts now faced each other, like mirrors that refused to match. In Neustria, Fredegund ruled the shadows. She managed people the way a smith manages iron heat, hammer, cool, repeat. In Austrasia, Brunhild preferred light. She fixed accounts, named honest men to hard jobs, and forced courtiers to speak in complete sentences instead of rumors. Fredegund built a net. Brunhild built a spine. The sisters' story had become a war, and the war had found two queens. Sigebert was a soldier's king, measured, stubborn, at ease under weight. Brunhild did not try to fight his battles for him. She sharpened his reasons to fight at all. Your brother, she said, let a servant become judge and jury in his house. He wears a crown. She wears the knife. Sigebert did not need courage. He needed clarity. Brunhild handed it to him as simply as bread. Across the border, King Chilperic, I felt the walls lean in. His bravest nobles visited less and complained more. Merchants smuggled news in bales of wool. Priests coughed before they spoke, as if words might be poison. And behind his throne, always within reach and always beyond blame, stood Fredegund, watchful, unshakable. She did not say war. She said timing. Armies gathered like storms. Banners went up, and with them every village's fear. Men who had never seen a sea now learned to read a map. Boys who had never left home now learned why boots must fit. The first season's fighting was the kind old men like to remember, and young men do not survive raids. Skirmishes, a push here, a pull there. But Sigebert's lines held. Then they moved. Brunhild's letters ran faster than horses. She wrote to bishops, to lords, to men whose loyalty was always for sale, and she priced it. Austrasia keeps its word, she wrote. Austrasia pays. On time, meanwhile, Fredegund whispered into cups and behind curtains. Austrasia keeps its pride, she murmured. Pride is expensive. 2 languages, 1 contest. Who could turn a kingdom into a fist first? It was Sigebert who struck the first real blow. City after city opened its gates to him. Even in Doors unlocked themselves when his riders approached. The people were not in love. They were tired. Tired of taxes that felt like threats. Tired of laws that changed with the weather. Tired of looking over their shoulder at dinner. They wanted, if not peace, then order. Sigebert wore order like a cloak. He smelled like mornings that start. On time, Chilperic tried battles. Battles did not answer back the way he liked. He tried treaties. Treaties arrived late and broken. He tried one last thing. He tried to be the man his songs claimed he was. It was not enough. His men faltered. His nobles wondered if bravery was just another word for being the last to run. Fredegund saw the shape of a disaster and did not panic. Panic is for people with only one plan. She sent money where blade could not go. She sent knives where money would be noticed. She dressed assassins like monks, envoys, beggars, and friends. She aimed at the head every time, and when the head wore a crown, she did not blink. Sigebert survived the first attempt because he did not drink the wine. He survived. The second because a dog barked at the wrong man at the right moment. He survived the third because his guard captain had a bad feeling and refused to apologize for it. These are the little things history calls luck and soldiers call work. Luck bends, though, when hands push hard enough by the next summer. Sigebert stood not at his border, but at Chilperic's door. He had one real ground. His men were not only living, they were singing. In city squares, people practiced speaking his name with approval, the way you practice a word you hope will be useful in the morning. Even some of Chilperic's lords sent soft messages, the kind that begin, if the wind should change. Fredegund felt the wind change and changed it back. A peace talk was arranged. Of course, it was. We call it talk when both sides want to find time to do something else. Sigebert entered the town like a man stepping into a room where he had finally earned the right to sit at the big table. The crowd pressed forward cheers, hands, faces. Messengers ran, priests prayed. Somewhere behind a shutter, a woman held her breath and did not know why. Two men stepped out of the crowd. They were small, unremarkable, the kind of people nobody tries to remember. They carried rolled petitions, the type scribes write and nobles ignore. Sigebert took one as a sign of mercy. He bent his head slightly, as kings sometimes do when they mean to be kind in public. Steel flashed from the roll like a tongue. The first blow did not kill Sigebert. The second might have. The third made the questions stop mattering. The men were seized, cut down, cut again. The crowd broke and tried to run in all directions at once. In the small, wide silence, after a shout, you could hear the sound of plans changing. Fredegund was not there, but her idea was. It was enough, Brunhild heard. The news first as a rumor, then as a scream with nouns. For a full count of 10, she stood perfectly still. The world around her moved the door, the messenger, the candle, but she did not. Then she sat down and put both hands on the table. Grief hurts less when your fingers have a job. Her right hand held the table. Her left hand reached for a pen. Find me the names, she told her steward. Find me the coins that bought them. Find me the hand that passed the scroll. Find me the man who knew where my husband would stand. Find me every bridge between that moment and Fredegund. The steward bowed and hoped his legs would not fail him. Chilperic reappeared in his own kingdom, like a man returning to a house that no longer fits. He had almost lost everything. He had kept it through a kind of miracle most men don't pray for. The nobles cheered loudly and counted the exits with their eyes. The people shouted praise and began to forget the names they had learned to pronounce last week. Such is the mercy and the cruelty of crowds. Fredegund walked the palace that night without a lantern. She knew every step. She did not celebrate. Celebrations are noisy. Noise is for people who need to convince themselves. She needed to convince no one. She had done what had to be done, stopped a takeover, protected her child's future, and reminded every watching pair of eyes that fear can be quicker than loyalty. Will there be peace? A courtier asked her, very carefully, as if the word itself might be wired to a trap. There will be time, Fredegund said. We will use it. Brunhild was using it already. She did not try to look like a saint. Saints die early and cannot sign orders. She looked like a widow who understood arithmetic. She moved her allies like pieces on a board that had too many squares and not enough rules. She kept Austrasia from fracturing by doing something both simple and hard. She kept showing up. She sat in councils. She signed the ugly papers. She stared down men who were taller than her, richer than her, older than her, and she did not blink. First, and she looked for friends, not the soft kind. The kind that come with soldiers or with words that open gates. One of those friends was a king who watched both sides and picked neither until the price was right. Another was a bishop with a pen sharp enough to cut through a lie. His name would matter soon, and his blood would stain the wrong floor. But that is for another telling. For now, know that Brunhild did not give up. She learned how letters can do what swords cannot. She learned how weddings can build bridges or burn them. She learned that courts can be trained like dogs, if you start young and feed them on the same hour every day. In Neustria, Fredegund also learned. She learned which nobles were secretly tired of being brave, which guards turned their backs in the same place every night, which ministers could be bought cheaper with a rumor than with gold. She grew her web and tightened it, strand by strand. She did not have more scruples than yesterday. She had more reasons. Between them, a continent held its breath. Farmers planted anyway. Traders packed their carts anyway. Priests preached homilies about humility and went home to write letters about power. Children played war with willow swords and fell asleep before the real war reached their town. Time moved. One evening, the palace in Ruang glowed with candles. Bishop Pretextatus returned to his city after years away. People packed the church to see him say mass. They wanted to hear a voice that was not afraid. Outside, rain started that would not last. Inside, a queen's name was kept off tongues, but sat heavy on every mind. On that same evening, in a different room not very far away, Fredegund opened a small box. Inside were tiny vials, written orders, and a ring that could pass messages without words. She closed the box and told no stories about fate. She did not need stories. She had a plan. Brunhild dipped her pen. The bishop began the service. A messenger left the palace. The crowd murmured. The rain stopped, and in the hush that follows a prayer, someone's cup would taste wrong. The church in Ruang was full. Candles burned low. People stood shoulder to shoulder for a glimpse of a brave man who would finally come home. Bishop Pretextatus lifted the cup, said the holy words, and paused. For a heartbeat, the whole city went quiet, like the moment before a THUNDERCLAP. He sipped. At first, nothing changed. He set the cup down, blessed the people, and turned a page in his book. He took a breath to speak, then his hand shook. The book slipped. The breath did not come back the same way. A whisper climbed the walls. Poison. No one said Fredegund's name, but her shadow lengthened in every mind. The bishop did not fall at once. He held the edge of the altar and finished the line he had started, as if duty could keep a man standing when his legs had other ideas. 2 canons moved to help him. He waved them back, stubborn as oak. He would not give his enemies the pleasure of seeing him crawl. After the service, he collapsed in the sacristy. The city cried in a single voice: fear, anger, helpless prayers. A physician was called. He whispered about herbs and humours and kept his eyes on the floor. By nightfall, the bishop still breathed, but the breath came hot and thin. The physician told the canons to keep quiet. He did not want to choose sides with his tongue. Across the river, Fredegund sat in a small room with stone walls that did not echo. On the table lay a wooden box, a folded letter, and a ring that looked plain if you did not know how it travelled. She closed the box carefully, as a mother might close a cradle. She gave the letter to a trusted hand. Her voice was low and even. "Deliver this the old way," she said. "No heralds, no seals, no talk." The servant bowed and left without asking any questions. In Fredegund's court, curiosity was a sport for people with no plans. News moved faster than riders. By morning, markets whispered the same list. Bishop sick, cup strange, church wept. By noon, the story had new edges. He denounced the queen. He named her. He did it from the altar. None of that had happened. It did not matter. Rumor runs on. Feelings, not facts. In Austrasia, Brunhild heard 3 versions of the tale before sunset. She sorted them like a merchant sorting coin real, suspect, false. She wrote 2 letters, one to the bishop's clergy, begging them to guard their shepherd, one to a lord in Neustria who disliked Fredegund and liked money more than fear. She sealed both. She did not waste wax on rage. "Fredegund poisons from a distance," said one of Brunhild's ladies, shaking with anger. "She does not dare to face the people she harms." Brunhild stared at the lamp a long moment. "No," she said. "She dares. She simply prefers to win." In Rouen, the bishop woke and asked for paper. He could not stand. He could still write. The first line was crooked. The second steadied. He wrote names. He wrote places. He wrote what he had seen and what he had guessed. He did not write Fredegund. He wrote those who destroy the peace, which was a safer way to aim at a storm. That night the cathedral doors were barred, but a message left anyway. A small hand pushed a folded scrap beneath the sill of a side chapel. A larger hand picked it up and carried it to a house with guarded windows. The next morning a courier left that house and rode south, and then east, and then changed horses and roads, until no one could swear where he had been at all. Someone with a long memory would remember the day, but not the mile. Webb did not sleep. A goldsmith was called to court to fix a clasp on a box that did not need fixing. While he worked, Fredegund asked simple questions with simple answers. Which noblewoman had been seen visiting the bishop's household? Which merchant's boy ran faster than the rest? Which priest had a sister who told secrets for the price of a loaf? The goldsmith did not know, but the guards at her door did. The queen listened without blinking and paid each speaker exactly as much as he believed he deserved. That was her gift, to measure men's pride like cloth. By noon she had a list of 5 names and 2 guesses. By dusk she had turned the guesses into facts. By midnight 3 of the names were already on the road to other towns, very far away, very suddenly employed by other masters. When the sun rose, people said, "How strange they left." When the second sun set, people stopped saying anything about them at all. The bishop lived 2 more weeks. Each day he spoke to someone he trusted and told them something that could survive after he did not. He did not preach in the square. He did not point fingers in the street. He had been exiled once for speaking too quickly. He would not be silenced twice for speaking too loud. He was not afraid to die. He was afraid to die useless. On the 10th day, a visitor came in quiet hours. He wore a monk's robe. His hands were clean in the wrong way. He asked to see the bishop's library. He asked again. He was told no. The canons moved him gently to the door and less gently into the courtyard. He left a blessing in a language no one recognized and did not look back. On the 12th day, the bishop gave his ring to a boy with steady eyes. "Take this to a man whose door is never closed," he said. "Tell him, I said, do not write lies to fight lies. Write truth, and time will do the rest." The boy ran without stopping. On the 14th day, the bishop died. His funeral took longer than planned because grief slows even strong hands. The city poured into the streets. Merchants closed their shutters. Fishmongers washed their stalls as if washing away the day would make the next one cleaner. The bells would not stop. The sound shook roofs and nerves. Fredegund did not attend. She sent gifts for the poor instead. Bread, oil, salt. She knew the price of a quiet street. She also sent a message to the new bishop. The queen remembers. The city, the new bishop sent a message back. The city remembers the queen. The exchange was polite, and everyone who read the words understood the quiet threat hidden in the commas in Neustria's palaces. One chill rumor spread even faster than the story of the bishop. It held the one topic that makes every court buzz and every scribe lean his head closer to the page. Sex in this case, the ugliest kind. The whisper claimed Fredegund had slept with her stepsons. It claimed she had lured them, trapped them, ruined them, and then, when they became dangerous, removed them. Was it true? No one could say. Some said yes, with the certainty that comes from enjoying a story. Some said no, with the certainty that comes from fearing the person inside it. The facts were simple and hard. Chilperic's sons from earlier marriages kept dying, disappearing, or shaving their heads in monasteries. An honest man might call it politics. A cruel man might call it proof. A careful man might call it fog. Fredegund did not defend herself. She did not send out a public denial. She did not threaten to sue the rumor for slander in a court of law that did not exist. She let the rumor work for her. Fear travels just as well under a dirty flag as a clean one. If men believed she would cross that line, they would be slower to cross her in anything else. But there was one step she did take. She tightened the watch on her stepsons who remained. One, Clovis, was already a ghost in the city's mouth. One, Maravik, was trouble with a crown. He had charm, friends, and the kind of young anger that looked like a plan from far away. He flirted with rebellion. He flirted with women. He may even have flirted with his stepmother's patience, which is not a safe sport in any century. When Maravik tried to raise support, soldiers appeared at the edge of his world like trees that learned to walk while he slept. He escaped once, twice, hid under the wrong roof, and learned that hospitality can have a price. When he finally fell into his father's hands, the king sent him to a monastery for peace. The monks shaved his head. Peace, in the 6th century, often looked like a door that locked from the outside. Fredegund visited the abbey on a feast day. She brought candles and thin smiles and a purse for the poor. She prayed in the chapel with her hands pressed tight together. No one could say she had ordered anything. No one dared to guess what she had hoped for. After she left, the abbot kept rubbing his thumbs together as if washing away wax that was not there. Brunhild collected every scrap of news and built a picture. In it, Fredegund was a spider queen. Was that fair? Brunhild did not care about fair. She cared about accurate. The picture taught her three things. Fredegund never rushed unless the rush itself was the weapon. She liked gifts that carried teeth, and she trusted silence to finish her sentences. So Brunhild changed her tools. She wrote fewer letters and made more visits. She lured neutral men with steady coin, not promises. She asked priests to preach about justice without naming names, and she told them to keep the temperature low. We will not give her heat to burn us with, she said. We will bring water and time. But time had ideas of its own. One morning, a courier arrived at the Austrasian court with a narrow face and a wider fear. He carried a bundle of copied orders, a list of payments, and a seal that did not match its holder. It was the kind of packet men die to hide and kingdoms kill to find. The letters showed who paid whom, who drank what, who bowed whereand in the margins. A small hand had drawn a tiny ring next to certain names. The ring meant trusted. The ring meant hers. Brunhild spread the papers on a table and read until her eyes ached. She saw Fredegund's shape everywhere without seeing her name once. It was a lesson in how to rule with no fingerprints. She smiled, not because she liked what she saw, but because finally she could show what she had only been able to say. This is not enough to hang her, her steward warned. It is enough to choose friends, Brunhild said, and it is enough to scare the wrong ones. In Neustria, Fredegund sensed the shift without reading a single letter. Crowds had gone from tense to polite. Polite is the step before cold. Some nobles had stopped emphasizing her titles when they spoke. Tiny choices, strong signals. She did not rage. She made a list. At the top was not a bishop. It was not a lord. It was a boy, Clothar. Her son had grown from cradle to toddler to child who remembered faces. He laughed at the wrong times and slept like a promise. He did not know that every breath he took cost his mother a new enemy. He only knew that when she stood in a doorway, the room belonged to him. Fredegund stood over his small bed in the quiet hour and thought like a soldier. How many lives left between him and a knife? She asked herself, not in fear, but in math. She needed fewer. She needed control. She needed the air itself to hesitate before it touched her child. She had a plan. It involved a holy day, a crowded nave, and a show of trust so shocking that no one would forget it. She would speak to the people in the only language they believed more than rumor, risk. If she used her own baby to send the message, they would listen. And somewhere in a dim cell with lime on the walls, a shaved young man stared at the small square of sky he could still see. He was not broken yet. He had teeth. He had a memory full of wrongs. He whispered a name into the bedstraw. Mother, he said, but he did not mean the woman who had borne him. The bell rang before dawn, a flat iron sound that turned the grey air inside the abbey even colder. Merivik sat up on his straw pallet and stared at the square of sky beyond the bars. He could smell bread baking, damp stone, and the slow anger that never left him now. A monk slid open the hatch, pushed in a bowl of thin soup, and did not meet his eyes. Peace, the monk said softly. Locks. Merivik said back, just as softly. They had shaved his head and said it made him closer to God. What it really did was make him less useful to armies and less attractive to nobles who liked their kings crowned. Tonsure was a holy word for a political trick. Merivik understood tricks. He had grown up in a house that breathed them. In Neustria, a royal son was hope until he was competition. With Fredegund in the palace, the line between those two states was narrow enough to cut your feet if you walked it barefoot. Merivik had tried to be loyal to his father. He had also tried to be alive. These aims were no longer compatible. His last memory of freedom was a room with tapestries and quick voices. Friends pressed his hands. Now, they whispered, if you don't move now, you'll never move at all. He moved. Soldiers appeared as if the flagstones had learned how to stand. He escaped once, twice. He hid under the roof of a man who said the right things and meant the wrong ones. When the door opened at midnight, Merivik knew he had trusted too much. They brought him to King Chilperic. The king's face looked old and new at once, like a coin that had been polished too often. Love for his son wrestled with fear for his throne and lost. A monastery, Chilperic said, for peace. The word landed like a door bolt. Fredegund did not speak that day. She did not need to. She stood by a window and watched the pattern the light made on the floor. When the order was written, she stepped forward to press the seal. That was all. A small, neat movement. The sort of movement that writes a life in a different direction forever. Merivik ate the soup. Because hungry men do stupid things, he would not be stupid. He watched the monks and learned their hours. He learned which one turned the key with a full wrist and which one used only fingers. He learned which brother prayed with his eyes open and which brother had a sister in the city who delivered eggs and gossip in equal measure. He learned something else. 2 men who call themselves neutral still sleep somewhere at night. A place may be holy and still belong to someone. He started to write small letters on small scraps. He learned which mouse holes led to which rooms. He learned patience the way men learn languages, because he would die if he didn't. Far away, Brunhild learned patience for her own reasons. The map was a cage unless you changed its hinges. She could not rip Merivik from the abbey by force. That would give Fredegund everything she wanted. A story of wicked Austrasians attacking holy ground. So Brunhild read the bishop lists, noted which abbots owed which favours, and paid for silence that did not look like payment. Why help him? A counsellor asked. He is the son of your enemy. He is the problem of my enemy, Brunhild said. Problems have a way of sharpening into weapons when you throw them back. If Merivik could be turned into witness, into symbol, into thorn, he could cost Fredegund nights of sleep. Even queens fight badly when they are tired. At court, Fredegund counted differently. She measured the distance between hazard and heir, with the cool math of a woman who has already made worse choices and survived. The hazard was clear. Stepsons, boys who were once cuddled in public and counted in private as future trouble. Each carried a cluster of lords, tutors, and hopeful hangers-on who saw their own future in the boy's face. One stepson, Clovis, had stopped being a problem the way storms stop suddenly, with damage and no confession. Fever, the doctors said. The palace nodded. The streets nodded. The kitchens whispered. Fever was a wonderful word. It blamed no one and feared everyone. It also died with the body and could not be questioned. Merivik was different. He was loud, charming, and the kind of handsome that makes men follow for the wrong reasons and women stare for the right ones. He smiled like he had already won, and walked like the floor had agreed. If he remained free, nobles would gather. If he remained visible, rumors would grow. If he remained alive, futures would multiply against Clotha, Fredegund's child. Fredegund's answer was not theatre. It was pressure. Pressure on friends, on doors, on choices. She split Morovec's allies with bribes that felt like dignity and threats that sounded like advice. She made loyalty to him expensive and loyalty to her convenient. Men do not change their souls in a day, but they change their plans when their sisters need dowries and their barns need roofs. To Chilperic, she spoke of peace again. The boy is safe with monks, she said. Let him pray, let us rule. The king rubbed his eyes, the way tired men rub a thought to see if it becomes kinder. He said yes because saying no meant admitting he had lost control of his own house. Merovic, however, did not plan to pray his life away. On the third week, a message slid under his door, wrapped in a strip of blue cloth. He broke the knot with his thumbnail. 4 words: stable, wall, 3rd hour. He folded the cloth back, put it under his tongue, and waited for bells. At the 3rd hour he knelt in the chapel like a good penitent, and slid sideways on his knees until a pillar hid him. Then he rose and walked not fast toward the courtyard and the stable beyond. If you ran in an abbey, your feet shouted your name. Behind the stable was a wall that looked like every other wall, except one stone near the bottom had been chipped by someone who understood hammers. Merovic pressed his shoulder against it and pushed. It moved the width of 2 fingers. Air sighed through. On the other side, a boy's voice whispered, "My lord." Not so loud, Merovic said, and smiled for the first time in days. A rope, a scrape, a deep breath. He wriggled through the gap and came up with hay in his hair and rage in his mouth. The boy handed him a cloak, a knife, and an apology for the dullness of both. They ran along the ditch while the bell tolled the next office. As the monks sang, 2 figures joined the hedge and then left it behind. He made it a mile. He almost made it 3. At the 4th mile, a horse stamped in a copse of trees where horses were not supposed to be. Men stepped out with crossed spears and the sad professionalism of people whose orders are going to be obeyed today. By whose command? Merovic said, though he already knew. By peace, the captain answered, and did not blink. They did not hurt him. They did not have to. They brought him back, shaved the stubble where the tonsure had grown out, and added a 2nd lock to the door that did not look like a lock. The abbot reminded him about humility. Merovic stared at the square of sky and learned a new prayer. Next time, in Soissons, Fredegund unrolled a fresh sheet of vellum and wrote a list. At the top, she wrote a single word: Clotha. Every line below it started with a name and ended with an action. A count to be reassigned. A tutor to be replaced. A guard to be moved to nights because he was better when he was tired. A city gate to close earlier because dusk made cowards bold. Not all her moves were knives. Some were gifts, a wedding arranged, to keep 2 loud families busy loving themselves. A tax remitted in a region where soldiers had trudged too long, bread for towns that remembered the bishop's funeral too vividly. Fear rules quickly, food rules quietly. She used both. It worked. Streets calmed from tense too careful. Careful is manageable. Nobles practiced saying queen with their full voices again. The rumor about Stepson beds kept slithering through corridors, but Fredegund did not bother to chase it. She let it do its worst work to make men imagine her capable of anything. Imagination is free labor for tyrants. She collected the wages without touching the rumour at all. Only one place refused to hold still. Austrasia. Brunhild smiled without showing her teeth, and met with the kind of men who cut their bread with the same knife they cut their meat. She did not promise them glory, she promised them invoices paid on time. In a world of grand words, reliable coin sounds like love, and she watched Morovek's cage. What if he breaks? A duke asked hopefully. Then he runs, Brunhild said, and running men make a lot of noise. Noise attracts future, toward us or away. Toward whoever looks like tomorrow, she said, and did not blink. One late afternoon, when the sky over Soissons turned the color of cooled iron, Chilperic sat with Fredegund in a room that pretended to be private. A young page poured wine, and tried to become heir. "Do they hate me?" the king asked suddenly. "Some do," Fredegund said. "Some hated you last year, some will hate you next." A king cannot be popular and safe. He looked tired in a way clothes cannot fix. What about the church? She thought of pretextatus, and did not change her expression. "We cannot fight sermons with swords," she said. "We can crowd the church with piety, give them a show. They can't refuse. A procession, a baptism," she said. He blinked. "Whose?" She turned her head toward the adjoining room where a nurse sang a thin song. Clotha gurgled and laughed at nothing, which is to say, everything. "Our son," Fredegund said, publicly, grandly. "Invite the nobles who mutter. Invite the priests who frown. Make them hold the baby. Make them swear duty in front of God and bread sellers." Chilperic frowned. "Is it safe?" "It will look safe," she said. "That is what matters." He did not hear the other answer hiding inside her. Words, "it will be useful." Because Fredegund's plan was layered the way a good cloak is lined. Warmth, weight, and a pocket for a knife. A public baptism offered more than piety. It offered crowds perfect cover for a message only one man needed to receive. In the crush of bodies and incense, in the holy hush after the priest's words, a rival could learn what happens when he stands too close to the queen's child and too far from the queen's mercy. She would put her baby into the arms of a man. Everyone watched. The gesture would say trust. The moment would say checkmate. In the abbey, Morovek slept badly and dreamed of doors that opened. In Austrasia, Brunhild sharpened a letter into a spear. In Soissons, Fredegund counted candles for a cathedral and counted blades for a corridor. On the morning of the baptism, the city woke early. Bakers worked fast. Tailors brushed cloaks. Children practiced being quiet. Priests rehearsed, pronouncing names without shaking. The cathedral would be full, and the queen would be smiling. And somewhere in the sacristy, a small parcel waited innocent, wrapped in linen, cool to the touch. The man who would carry it did not know how much it weighed. Dawn lifts over sight like a curtain, bakers tie on aprons. Candle smoke hangs low in the cathedral and then climbs, slow as a hymn. Today is not just any holy day. It is the day the court will wash its hands in public and pretend they are clean. Clotha, the king's infant son, will be baptized. The invitations arrive like orders. Nobles who have been muttering must show up and smile. Priests who have been frowning must bless and be blessed. Even the merchants who sell frankincense are told which door to use. King Chilperic wants a packed church. Queen Fredegund wants something else. Leverage, she has planned everything with the calm of a surgeon. The procession, the place where she will stand, the moment she will step forward. The man who will carry the child up the nave, the man who will hold the book. The man who will be exactly close enough to take a blade without anyone seeing the hand that delivered it. Because this is not only a baptism, it is a message in public, addressed to one person, with the whole city as witness. The bells begin. Cloaks swish against stone. Gold flashes like tiny suns. Chilperic enters first, robes heavy, face composed. He knows this show matters. He also knows he is not the director. Fredegund follows, luminous without softness, a smile tailored to the distance between herself and the front row. In her arms, wrapped in white and tied with a ribbon that cost more than most men's houses, is clother. The reason songs get written and knives get sharpened, the choir swells. Children stop fidgeting. The nobles squint to read each other. Does your nod mean loyalty or calculation? Does your prayer smell like fear? The air tastes like incense and secrets. At the top of the nave, waiting, stands Count Eberelfa, broad-shouldered, well-liked noble whose charm buys him endless second chances. He has friends. He has a following. He has a talent for loitering around thrones without seeming to. He has lately been concerned, which is the word nobles use when they are thinking about crossing the room. He was invited to stand close to the font as an honor. Eberelf feels the honor like a collar. Fredegund glides forward and, in a movement that the gossips will be arguing about for 20 years, she offers her infant son into Eberelf's arms. The crowd inhales as one. Even Chilperic blinks. It is theater. It is trust on display, trust so blatant it must be either sincere or deadly. Eberelf has no choice. He takes the child. The baby grips the noble's finger, the way all babies grip anything that reaches toward them. The crowd softens. The choir finds a bright note and holds it. Fredegund steps back half a pace. She is framed by light from a high window. The priest lifts his hands. The godparents advance. The ointment is opened. The book is red dot, and in the small silence before holy words fall, in the moment when even shoes stop scuffing stone, a man moves. He has been part of the church wall since dawn, the kind of small, forgettable figure every great event attracts. He holds a folded document tied with twine, just like the lazy petitions that clutter chancery tables. He steps in, quick and penitent, head down, mouth muttering apologies. The guards twitch, but not enough. The priest glances, annoyed. Eberolf turns, baby in arms, because a nobleman cannot ignore a petitioner in public, without looking like he eats prayers for breakfast. The document unwraps like a snake. Steel flashes. The first strike goes for Eberolf's ribs. Under the arm, the spot where armor doesn't live during ceremonies. He flinches and twists. His only thought is, do not drop the child. Then the knife catches cloth and skin, not heart. The second strike is a blind thrust, wild now, aimed at center mass. A hand no one will ever agree who shoves from behind, and the blade skims along his linen, leaving a line of red that blooms and runs. The third strike never lands. A guard tackles the assassin around the waist. The two of them smash into a column with the sound of a chest breaking. The cathedral erupts, screams. Men slam into men. Women yank children down behind benches. The choir explodes into shreds of harmony. The holy book falls and bursts into fluttering pages. Eberelf cradles Clother tight and drops to his knees, turning his body into a shield. Blood paints his sleeves. The baby wails proof of life. Alarm bell, siren. Fredegund is already moving. She does not go to her son. That would be instinct. She acts with intention. She reaches Eberelf in 3 long strides, pulls the child in 2, her arms with one hand, and with the other hand, how convenient, clamps a kerchief against Eberelf's wound, as if this were a scene of mercy she had rehearsed. It is a picture so perfect that if a painter tried to invent it later, you would roll your eyes at the symbolism. Protect the Count, she commands, voice cut from iron. Spare the fool who did this for questioning. The guards obey the first order. The second is harder. The assassin thrashes. Someone's sword hilt meets his skull with an ugly sound. He goes limp. A captain kicks the knife across the stone. It spins and comes to rest at the foot of the font, a small, wet punctuation mark. Chilperic finds his voice. "Who sent you?" he shouts. The man on the floor moans instead of answering. The king looks at the crowd, the way kings do when they want fear to vote in their favor. Who dares bring murder to God's house? From the back, a tremor passes through the nobles, like a thought they did not mean to have. Some look at Fredegund, some do not. All of them remember how close a blade can get when the queen is in the room. The priest, pale and stubborn, clears his throat. "This is still a sacrament," he says, hands shaking. "The child must be baptized." Fredegund does not make him beg twice. She steps to the font, blood on her sleeve, peaceful child against her shoulder, and lowers Clotha too. The water, as if nothing has happened except a minor test of reflexes. The priest speaks the words with a voice that quavers at first, and then remembers its old strength. Water touches a baby's forehead. Marks are made. A name is given, Clothar. Applause would be obscene. So the church gives silence, and silence so heavy it pushes people toward the exits without anyone agreeing to leave. The ceremony ends not with a recessional, but with a slow unraveling. The assassin is dragged away. Eberalf is half carried, half walking, face grey, jaw set, dignity intact because he insists on it. The king's captain barks assignments that sound like prayers: street patrols, door guards, office sweeps. The cathedral empties outside. The city breathes again and then starts to talk all at once. "Did you see the baby she gave him, Eberelf, on the very steps? God save us. Rumor will be fast, but Fredegund's own messengers are faster. By the time the first loaf has cooled in the bakeries, by the time the first skin of wine is opened in the taverns, a neat official version is already marching from mouth to mouth, an assassin, bought by distant enemies who cannot stand a peaceful. Neustria attacked the loyal Count Eberelf in a holy place. The queen, brave and maternal, saved her son and tended the count with her own hands. The king's justice will be swift, and God has blessed Clotha before all eyes, proving the royal child is under heaven's protection. It's a tidy story, made of facts arranged at a flattering angle. It leaves out 3 details. Eberelf has been concerned lately and was considering a different kind of loyalty. The assassin's path through the guards had been clear enough to look like choreography. Fredegund seemed less surprised than anyone else in the building. But that is the art of power. Show the world a picture, and let their eyes do the rest. The court doctor stitches and swears, mutters about saints, and orders quiet. The count sleeps with one hand on a knife and dreams of water and white linen turning red. When he wakes, Fredegund is there with broth and that careful smile of hers, the one that looks like kindness if you stand too far away. "You were brave," she says, voice warm as a well-fed hearth. "Your loyalty is noted." He tries to read her, fails, and settles for nodding. He cannot afford to be enemies with the woman who just made him a hero in public. He also cannot afford to be her friend. He decides to live, for now, and see what tomorrow demands. Chilperic wanders his own palace that night, like a man who cannot remember which door leads to his bed. He is shaken, not by blood, he's seen plenty of that, but by the feeling that his wife treats catastrophe like a chess. Problem: he loves his son. He loves the queen he cannot control. He hates that those two loves are not the same kind of safety. Was it wise, he asks her, when they are finally alone, to trust a noble with your heir? She asks back, eyes steady. To turn a sacrament into a spectacle, he says. It was already a spectacle, she replies. I made sure we owned it. He drinks and says nothing more. He knows better than to argue about theatre with its director. Word crosses borders, because word always does. In Austrasia, Brunhild reads an account that makes her mouth go thin. She put the infant in a rival's arms, the letter says, and that the knife find only what it could. Brunhild closes her eyes, not from shock, but from recognition. Fredegund is not playing cards. She is playing people. So she risked her son, a lord mutters, disgusted and impressed. What mother? Brunhild cuts him off. A mother who plans to keep him alive. The lord frowns. By risking him. By telling every man in Neustria, if you reach for my child, you will miss. And then you will die for nothing. She sets the letter down. Fear is a leash. She just fitted it. Back in Soissons, the assassin wakes in a cellar and learns the price of failure. He has no name now, only questions. Who paid you? Which door did you use? Who handed you the scroll? He answers with groans. And then with a name he thinks might buy him a kinder knife. It does not. The captain reports to the king. The king nods. Fredegund does not attend the questioning. That would be inelegant. She merely receives the result, which is cleaner than truth and therefore more useful. For 3 days, the city pretends to be relieved. Shopkeepers talk about how quickly the guards respond now. Priests say the child's cry sounded like victory. Old women tell one another that the queen's hands did not shake. But relief is not peace. It is just exhaustion wearing a smile. Underneath, the ground shifts. Eberelf recovers. Recovery, in this case, means he has learned that being near the queen is a weather report, not a privilege. He asks for leave to visit a family estate for health. It is granted with a gift basket and a warning disguised as fruit. He understands. He extends his stay without asking. The court's temperature drops from fever to chill. Chatter shrinks. People weigh their jokes before saying them out loud. Fredegund knows this feeling well. It is the sound of a palace learning not to trust its own echo. She is satisfied for a week. Then something inside her turns, the way a hunter's head turns when the forest goes too quiet. The baptism worked, but it did not change the one detail she cannot edit. Chilperic is still alive, still temperamental, still a king who thinks he can be played. He cannot be replaced unless the world allows it. One evening, he reaches for his cloak. The weather is fine, he says. I'll hunt. Fredegund smooths his cuff with her thumb, an affectionate gesture that lands like a seal on a document. She smiles, the kind of smile that makes men believe in good luck. Take your best hounds, she says, and your most loyal friends. He kisses Clother on the brow. He jokes with the page. He leaves, whistling a tune that sounds like a promise to return in the morning. A rider will come back with dust in his mouth. and a story that has too many knives in it. The rider reached the gate with dust in his teeth and panic on his tongue. "Open," he shouted, voice cracking. "Open for the king." And then, because truth outruns loyalty when fear presses the ribs, for the dead king. The guards froze the way men do when the ground tilts. A bell began to ring without permission. In the courtyard, a boy dropped a basket of apples. They bounced, bright and stupid, while a whole city tried to remember how to breathe. By the time the rider was dragged into the great hall, the story had hardened into a shape that would never quite change. Chilperic had gone out to hunt with a small party. The hounds had ranged ahead. A handful of men had hung back to drink. The king had paused to wipe sweat from his eyes and laugh at something no one would ever remember in detail. Then the bushes whispered. Then a man, maybe two, stepped out with knives that wanted a future. One blade found the king's side. Another found his back. A third struck low and mean. Chilperic staggered, reached for a name or a prayer, found neither, and went down into the leaves. No ransom, no speech, no royal last word that a poet could turn into a banner. Just the sound a body makes when the world stops needing it. In the lodge, someone pressed a cloak to the wounds, until the cloak looked like it had been dyed that way. A page god helped him try to sing the king awake. Men shouted orders they had no right to give. By the time they hoisted Chilperic to his horse, he was already an argument. Who saw the faces? A captain asked the rider, voice flat with dread. No one, the rider said, or someone, or he swallowed hard. My lord, it was woods and blood. Woods and blood. Perfect cover for an unsolvable crime. The hall emptied itself of air as if a great mouth had inhaled. The court looked toward a single door, the one that always mattered when the map caught fire. Fredegund stepped through it. Before anyone could say her name, she did not run. She did not wail. She crossed the floor like someone who had already been told how this day would go. Her gown was dark and well chosen. In the wrong light, it might have been morning already. She did not touch the rider. She touched the table once, with the tips of her fingers, as if swearing an oath to wood. Shut the city, she said. Close the markets and the gates. No one in, no one out. Double the watchers. Call the captain of the treasury. Bring me the child. The hall moved. Orders moved faster than grief. In a side chamber, Clotha was sleeping the way only babies and tyrants do. The nurse lifted him with a sound that was almost a prayer and carried him into a room that just became a throne. Fredegund took her son, pressed her mouth to his hair. One heartbeat, privatand, then turned public again. Where is the steward? She asked. And the bishop? The steward came running with keys that clicked like coins. The bishop arrived, with a face he could not control. He had not loved the king. He had loved the idea of order. Order had just been shoved down a flight of stairs. Fredegund did not bow to either of them. We go to the strong room, she said. Now they went. Down the corridor that smelled like wax and old decisions, down the steps that remembered every footfall of every crisis, to the doors that knew how to be heavy. The steward's hands shook the first time, and the key kissed the iron instead of entering it. Fredegund put one palm against the wood and did not say a word. The second time, the key turned inside, shadows and treasure. Chests stacked like stern cousins. Sacks of coin, dull and patient. Jewels that could pretend to be light. Fredegund crossed the threshold with the baby on her hip and the bishop at her back. She did not ask permission from any of the saints. Majesty, the bishop began, because titles are useful when reality is rude. This isn't. Survival always is, Fredegund said. You will baptize oaths today. Whose? He asked, though he knew hers, she said, nodding to a small bright crown in a coffer, and theirs. She meant every noble who would dare to breathe. Inside these walls before sunset, they barricaded the room from the inside. Then Fredegund sent messages out through the seams of the palace like smoke through a thatch roof. Summon the counts, the mayors of the palace, the captains, the men who can ride fast without losing their courage on the second mile. Send quiet riders to the towns that would flip first if given a reason. Send louder riders to the ones that flip only if you shout. By noon, the great hall had filled with faces trying to look like stone. Swords clinked, rings glittered, minds raced behind eyes that pretended not to. Everyone had a plan. No one had a clear one. Fredegund allowed them to stew for a full slow minute, then had the doors to the strong room thrown open so hard the sound snapped spines. She stood framed by iron and oak, a crown in one hand, a child in the other. The king is dead, she said, and there it was, the sentence that makes men honest. Your grief will be measured by your obedience. Clotha is king. Someone scoffed. Someone else went pale. The bishop stepped forward, eyes on the relics laid out on a table that an hour ago held money and now held God. Fredegund nodded once. The bishop lifted a holy bone and began to speak. Oaths stacked up like firewood, to the child, to the realm, to the queen who had the locks. This is how a regency begins, not with a coronation, but with a room you cannot leave unless you repeat exactly what the person in front of you just said. A clever count tried to object. Lady, he said smoothly, by tradition, Fredegund said, keeps kings alive. We do not have one of those today. She shifted Clotha on her hip without looking away. We have me. He had the sense to lower his eyes. Outside, the city fidgeted. Inside, the treasury breathed like a beast that had found a new master. Fredegund began to pay people back, pay for soldiers who had found the dead king to thrifty, grain for neighborhoods that would riot if they had nothing to do with their hands, donations to churches that would sermonize about humility and somehow end up praising the crown. She knew every coin she spent would come back as a rumor that worked for her. When a guard with a wandering gaze confessed to borrowing a ring he hadn't earned, Fredegund did not chop off the hand. She moved him to a night post on a quiet gate where mistakes would be cold and lonely. 2 months later, he returned himself to her chamber with a name and a shaking voice. I am tired of being afraid, he said. Let me be afraid for you. She gave him a shorter spear and a longer life. When a scribe's ledger showed a column that refused to behave, she did not send soldiers. She sent a priest known for charity. The priest asked after the scribe's wife, who had a cough. The queen's steward paid for syrup and wood. The ledger healed as if by miracle. Charity is just espionage with better lighting. 2. Giftsphere moves quickly. Gifts move deep. Fredegund understood the language of presents better than most kings. A gift is a debt wrapped to look like gratitude. It works on nobles with long tables and on abbots with short consciences. It even works on cities, which are just people glued together by roofs. She assembled hampers that looked like diplomacy and tasted like control. Waxed cheeses from a loyal valley. Thin wines that didn't cloud the mind. Cinnamon that had traveled too far to be unappreciated. Veils woven by women who owed the queen winters of thanks. Attached to each was a note, never more than 6 lines. In a hand that did not pretend to be humble or grand, you held firm when the bells rang. Your city is remembered. If the price of grain rises, send word before the people do. F.or. The monastery's roof leaks by the north transept. Accept this timber and the men to raise it. Pray for the king who sleeps and the child who wakes. F. She sent these 2 towns that lay like hinges along the routes Brunhild might use. No soldiers, no banners, just help that arrived precisely when tired people were most likely to curse a crown. A hinge well oiled does not squeal when it moves. Sometimes the gift had teeth. A count in the west had acquired a taste for gambling and a hatred of mornings. He owed half his estate to dice, and the other half 2 men who smiled with all the warmth of winter. Fredegund sent him a hunting hawk. It arrived in silence with a thin silk leash and a note that said, "She returns to the hand she knows." The count took the hint. Debts were paid. Private doors were opened. A hawk is just a metaphor that can fly. Another Lord Louder, poorer, braver than wise, grumbled that the treasury's locks seemed tighter when his sister asked for a dowry. A week later, a chest appeared with silver sufficient to make her a princess in any valley. The lid, when lifted, revealed a second lid with a mirror on the inside. The message was not subtle. Look at yourself and decide who you are. He did. He stopped grumbling. He started listening. 3. Goblet sand. Then, there were goblets. Fredegund didn't poison every cup that crossed her table. That would have been dull and inefficient. She made rumor do most of the work. People who think every cup is poison get drunk on their own fear and say too much to the wrong listener. Still, sometimes a goblet was a tool that needed using. A reconciliation supper was arranged for a cluster of nobles who had the bad habit of acting like they were a parliament. They entered wary and left merry, their wariness dulled by wine that was neither strong nor weak, just useful. The queen toasted each in turn, learned how their faces moved when they lied, and watched which man's cup returned empty too quickly for prudence. That man's steward was offered a new job the next morning in a different town, under a different name. The man himself began to reconsider the joys of independence. Not every goblet carried liquid. Sometimes it carried a choice, on a high, thin afternoon when the light made lies easier to see. Fredegund met Eberalf in a room with 2 chairs and 1 table. The count, recently stabbed in a church while holding her child, looked older and wiser, which are sometimes the same thing. A page set down 2 cups. The queen lifted hers. The count did not. Still cautious, she said, amused. Still alive, he said, not amused. Good, Fredegund replied. I'd hate to waste talent. You have 2 paths. One is the road to your estate, where you will grow old telling stories about how close you once stood to the sun. The other is the road to my counsels, where you will grow old because you stood with the sun. Pick. He stared, not at the cup, but at the wall behind her where a tapestry showed a lion staring at a stag that had not yet learned what eyes mean. What protects me if I choose wrong? He asked. Nothing, she said. But if you choose me, I will teach you how to need nothing. He chose. She smiled, a small, hard thing. The cup remained untouched. The contract had been the conversation all along. Goblets also traveled to places the queen would not. A bishop with a temper received a chalice so beautifully worked he could not help but use it. The enamel showed vines that looped back on themselves, serpents that bit their own tails, A quiet sermon on the dangers of words that start and end in the same breath. He preached more carefully after that. No poison necessary. The countergame across the border, Brunhild, watched these moves with respect. That came out sounding like disdain. She was not a woman to sit in her own palace and admire another queen's net. She wove her own treaties with edges, dowries that purchased garrisons, homilies that sounded like history lessons but were actually warnings. If Fredegund's gifts made hinges, Brunhild built bridges, marriages, alliances, roads paved with favors paid in advance. She didn't bribe. She budgeted loyalty. When Fredegund fattened a town with grain, Brunhild sent millstones, heavy, impossible to forget. When Fredegund hired spies, Brunhild trained clerks whose ink dried only on facts. When Fredegund used goblets, Brunhild used tables, long ones, with seats for men who liked to hear themselves be reasonable. She made their reason work for her, and when Fredegund tightened the leash on the church by feeding it, Brunhild loosened it by praising its bark. Cry out for justice, she told bishops. Cry out names if you must. A few did. A few regretted it, but the sound carried. In Soissons, sermons got longer. In Metz, tithes got higher. In between, soldiers got restless the way soldiers do when the smell of campaign season creeps into their beds. Letters with teeth. One evening, a packet arrived in Soissons, bearing the seal of a petty count who fancied himself a great one. Inside were letters copied from somewhere they shouldn't have been. Initials that pointed toward a noble who smiled too easily, and a small coin, an Austrasian, minting taped to the parchment with wax. Subtle, messy, effective. The clerk with the memory like wax laid the letters before the queen. If we publish these, he said, the nobles will scatter like bees. If we bury them, the captain said, the rot stays. Fredegund traced the coin with a finger. We will leak them, she decided. 2-3 men who hate each other, each will think he is the only one we trust. They will shout at dinner. Their wives will fret. Their servants will listen. And by Sunday, the city will swear it knew all along. About the Austrasian coin, the captain asked. No, she said. About the noble who smiles too easily. They did, and he didn't. The cabinet of remedies, by now half the palace swore. The queen kept a cabinet filled with tiny vials, belladonna. For lies, hellebore for arrogance, aconite for men who thought they couldn't be taught. Half the palace was wrong. The vials existed, yes, but they mostly held choice as wax for seals. Scents that stuck to letters and told her who had touched them. A ground glass that made ink show itself under lamplight. A powder that turned wine blue if a hand other than the queen's had poured it. Real poisons were rare. The rumor about them was the poison that mattered. Still, sometimes a body needed to fail at the right time. A courier who had been selling roots to the highest bidder collapsed on a road that no longer existed. A lord who liked to swear on saints and cheat on oaths woke up with a fever that lasted exactly long enough for his allies to rearrange their loyalties without his opinion. A mercenary captain found that every inn that welcomed him served a wine that tasted faintly of reconsider. He took the hint and rode east. Dinner with the dead weeks after Chilperic's murder. Fredegund held a memorial banquet. It was public. Sorrow, private audit. Every plate served, every cup lifted, every toast offered was a chance to measure the room's temperature. She sat where she could see hands. She listened for the sentences that end too quickly because a lie ran out of breath halfway through. A singer offered a lament so skillfully written it sounded like accusation sung in Latin. The room went still. On the line, Regina sin lacrimis, a queen without tears. Fredegund smiled. When the song ended, she stood and thanked the singer with a bracelet whose weight would outlast talent. Then she turned to the room. "I do not cry in public," she said simply. "I pay the living and protect the child." The room exhaled and decided that was a better plan than weeping. She drank from her cup. So did everyone else. The knife, you don't see all of this, the whispers, the gifts, the cups kept Neustria walking in a straight line for the length of a season. But a season is just a promise made to weather, and weather has friends. A letter reached Fredegund, written in a hand she knew too well. Brunhild saw someone paid to write like her. It was short. When a guard with a wandering gaze confessed to borrowing a ring he hadn't earned, Fredegund did not chop off the hand. She moved him to a night post on a quiet gate where mistakes would be cold and lonely. 2 months later he returned himself to her chamber with a name and a shaking voice. "I am tired of being afraid," he said. "Let me be afraid for you." She gave him a shorter spear and a longer life. When a scribe's ledger showed a column that refused to behave, she did not send soldiers. She sent a priest known for charity. The priest asked after the scribe's wife, who had a cough. The queen's steward paid for syrup and wood. The ledger healed as if by miracle. Charity is just espionage with better lighting. 2. Gifts fear moves quickly. Gifts move deep. Fredegund understood the language of presents better than most kings. A gift is a debt wrapped to look like gratitude. It works on nobles with long tables and on abbots with short consciences. It even works on cities, which are just people glued together by roofs. She assembled hampers that looked like diplomacy and tasted like control. Waxed cheeses from a loyal valley. Thin wines that didn't cloud the mind. Cinnamon that had traveled too far to be unappreciated. Veils woven by women who owed the queen winters of thanks. Attached to each was a note, never more than 6 lines. In a hand that did not pretend to be humble or grand, you held firm when the bells rang. Your city is remembered. If the price of grain rises, send word before the people do. F.O. The monastery's roof leaks by the north transept. Accept this timber and the men to raise it. Pray for the king who sleeps and the child who wakes. F. She sent these 2 towns that lay like hinges along the routes Brunhild might use. No soldiers, no banners, just help that arrived precisely when tired people were most likely to curse a crown. A hinge, well oiled, does not squeal when it moves. Sometimes the gift had teeth. A count in the west had acquired a taste for gambling and a hatred of mornings. He owed half his estate to dice, and the other half 2 men who smiled with all the warmth of winter. Fredegund sent him a hunting hawk. It arrived in silence with a thin silk leash and a note that said, "She returns to the hand she knows." The count took the hint. Debts were paid. Private doors were opened. A hawk is just a metaphor that can fly. Another lord, louder, poorer, braver than wise, grumbled that the treasury's locks seemed tighter when his sister asked for a dowry. A week later, a chest appeared with silver sufficient to make her a princess in any valley. The lid, when lifted, revealed a second lid with a mirror on the inside. The message was not subtle. Look at yourself and decide who you are. He did. He stopped grumbling. He started listening. 3. Goblet sand. Then there were goblets. Fredegund didn't poison every cup that crossed her table. That would have been dull and inefficient. She made rumor do most of the work. People who think every cup is poison get drunk on their own fear and say too much to the wrong listener. Still, sometimes a goblet was a tool that needed using. reconciliation supper was arranged for a cluster of nobles who had the bad habit of acting like they were a parliament. They entered wary and left merry, their wariness dulled by wine that was neither strong nor weak, just useful. The queen toasted each in turn, learned how their faces moved when they lied, and watched which man's cup returned empty too quickly for prudence. That man's steward was offered a new job the next morning in a different town, under a different name. The man himself began to reconsider the joys of independence. Not every goblet carried liquid, sometimes it carried a choice, on a high, thin afternoon when the light made lies easier to see. Fredegund met Eberalf in a room with 2 chairs and 1 table. The count recently stabbed in a church while holding her child looked older and wiser, which are sometimes the same thing. A page set down 2 cups. The queen lifted hers. The count did not. Still cautious, she said, amused. Still alive, he said, not amused. Good, Fredegund replied. I'd hate to waste talent. You have 2 paths. One is the road to your estate, where you will grow old telling stories about how close you once stood to the sun. The other is the road to my councils, where you will grow old because you stood with the sun. Pick. He stared, not at the cup, but at the wall behind her where a tapestry showed a lion staring at a stag that had not yet learned what eyes mean. What protects me if I choose wrong? He asked. Nothing, she said. But if you choose me, I will teach you how to need nothing. He chose. She smiled, a small, hard thing. The cup remained untouched. The contract had been the conversation all along. Goblets also travelled to places the queen would not. A bishop with a temper received a chalice so beautifully worked he could not help but use it. The enamel showed vines that looped back on themselves. Serpents that bit their own tails. A quiet sermon on the dangers of words that start and end in the same breath. He preached more carefully after that. No poison necessary. The countergame across the border, Brunhild, watched these moves with respect. That came out sounding like disdain. She was not a woman to sit in her own palace and admire another queen's net. She wove her own treaties with edges, dowries that purchased garrisons, homilies that sounded like history lessons but were actually warnings. If Fredegund's gifts made hinges, Brunhild built bridges, marriages, alliances, roads paved with favors paid in advance. She didn't bribe. She budgeted loyalty. When Fredegund fattened a town with grain, Brunhild sent millstones, heavy, impossible to forget. When Fredegund hired spies, Brunhild trained clerks whose ink dried only on facts. When Fredegund used goblets, Brunhild used tables, long ones, with seats for men who liked to hear themselves be reasonable. She made their reason work for her, and when Fredegund tightened the leash on the church by feeding it, Brunhild loosened it by praising its bark. Cry out for justice, she told bishops. Cry out names if you must. A few did. A few regretted it, but the sound carried. In Soissons sermons got longer. In Metz, tithes got higher. In between, soldiers got restless the way soldiers do when the smell of campaign season creeps into their beds. Letters with teeth. One evening, a packet arrived in Soissons, bearing the seal of a petty count who fancied himself a great one. Inside were letters copied from somewhere they shouldn't have been. Initials that pointed toward a noble who smiled too easily, and a small coin an Austrasian, minting taped to the parchment with wax. Subtle, messy, effective. The clerk with the memory like wax laid the letters before the queen. If we publish these, he said, The nobles will scatter like bees. If we bury them, the captain said, the rot stays. Fredegund traced the coin with a finger. We will leak them, she decided. 2-3 men who hate each other, each will think he is the only one we trust. They will shout at dinner. Their wives will fret. Their servants will listen. And by Sunday, the city will swear it knew all along. About the Austrasian coin, the captain asked. No, she said. About the noble who smiles to Italy. They did, and he didn't. The cabinet of remedies, by now half the palace swore. The queen kept a cabinet filled with tiny vials, belladonna. For lies, hellebore for arrogance, aconite for men who thought they couldn't be taught. Half the palace was wrong. The vials existed, yes, but they mostly held choice as wax for seals. Scents that stuck to letters and told her who had touched them. A ground glass that made ink show itself under lamplight. A powder that turned wine blue if a hand other than the queen's had poured it. Real poisons were rare. The rumor about them was the poison that mattered. Still, sometimes a body needed to fail at the right time. A courier who had been selling roots to the highest bidder collapsed on a road that no longer existed. A lord who liked to swear on saints and cheat on oaths woke up with a fever that lasted exactly long enough for his allies to rearrange their loyalties without his opinion. A mercenary captain found that every inn that welcomed him served a wine that tasted faintly of reconsider. He took the hint and rode east. Dinner with the dead weeks after Chilperic's murder. Fredegund held a memorial banquet. It was public. Sorrow, private audit. Every plate served, every cup lifted, every toast offered was a chance to measure the room's temperature. She sat where she could see hands. She listened for the sentences that end too quickly because a lie ran out of breath halfway through. A singer offered a lament so skillfully written it sounded like accusation sung in Latin. The room went still. On the line, Regina signed Lacrimis, a queen without tears. Fredegund smiled. When the song ended, she stood and thanked the singer with a bracelet whose weight would outlast talent. Then she turned to the room. I do not cry in public, she said simply. I pay the living and protect the child. The room exhaled and decided that was a better plan than weeping. She drank from her cup. So did everyone else. The knife, you don't see all of this, the whispers, the gifts. The cups kept Neustria walking in a straight line for the length of a season. But a season is just a promise made to weather, and weather has friends. A letter reached Fredegund, written in a hand she knew too well. Brunhild saw someone paid to write like her. It was short. You sweep your floors beautifully. How clean will they look when the roof is gone? A day later, word came that a bridge on a northern road had failed beneath a convoy carrying grain bought with the Queen's coin. No thieves, no bodies, just a gap where stone had been. On the same day, a marriage the Queen had arranged between 2 troublemaking houses postponed itself because the groom found religion and the bride found a backbone. And at Vespers, a bishop who had been pronouncing Clotha's name with enthusiasm suddenly remembered Latin as other subjects. Brunhild wasn't waiting. She was leaning. Fredegund signaled the captain. We tighten, she said. He nodded. And Brunhild, we make her blink. How? He asked. With the only thing she respects, the Queen said. A move so bold she has to answer with soldiers or silence. What move? She turned her ring once around her finger, a habit she did not know she had. A wedding, she said, one that looks like peace and smells like a trap. Outside, the wind shifted. In Austrasia, maps were unfolding. In Neustria, cups were being polished. Between them, The road grew crowded with men who did not yet know why they were marching. The letter arrived with a ribbon the color of bruises and words that smelled like honey. To the most serene queen of Neustria, peace thrives where families meet. Let us end the long winter between our houses with a wedding in spring. Brunhild, by the grace of God, queen of Austrasia's spring, Fredegund murmured, turning the parchment so the seal caught the light. She chooses the season that forgives everything. The captain waited, still as stone. Is it a trap? Of course, Fredegund said. That's why we'll go. She had told the captain the move she needed would be bold enough to make Brunhild answer with soldiers or silence. Brunhild chose a third answer, spectacle. A peace wedding in a border city big enough to hold 2 courts and small enough to remember. Who paid for the bread? Fredegund proposed the match herself in her reply. An Austrasian princessa, granddaughter of Brunhild, to wed a Neustrian prince from a loyal branch. A young man with good teeth, better manners, and no chance of outranking Clotha. It was a marriage that could braid 2 ropes without tying. The queen's hands. Brunhild's answer came fast. Agreed. In Austrasia, Brunhild understood the price of smiling. She did not send a girl to be swallowed. She sent a student, a granddaughter who read accounts as easily as psalms, who could dance in a hall and count the exits without losing the beat. Learn their rooms, Brunhild told the girl quietly. Not just the corridors, the rooms in their heads. In Neustria, Fredegund prepared the city like a stage. Fresh paint on doors, new straw in stables, safe meat in the markets, soldiers who knew the difference between prowling and patrolling. She placed Count Eberelf near the heart of it all, the man who had held her baby in a church and lived to avoid it. His presence said what she needed it to say. The queen trusts those who survive her storms. The day the Austrasian procession rode into the streets looked scrubbed, and the air tried to pretend it wasn't nervous. Banners climbed the wind. People craned their necks for a glimpse of the famous enemies. The widow who ruled with a ledger. The widow who ruled with a dagger. Brunhild dismounted like a woman who had been born on marble. She wore a dress that borrowed the sky, and a face that borrowed nothing. Fredegund met her halfway across the square. 2 courts held their breath, while 2 queens kissed each other's cheeks with all the warmth of January sun. Welcome, Fredegund said. Peace. Brunhild replied. The words sat between them like a glass on a table everyone expects to break. The wedding. That wasn't the wedding, unfolded like every wedding written by politics. Vows that sounded like treaties. Laughter that sounded like truce. Wine that sounded like permission to forget how we got here. Musicians smoothed the edges of conversations. Priests held God between kingdoms like a referee. Fredegund did what she always did, counted. Which nobles leaned toward Brunhild. Which bishops stood at angles that suggested a future sermon. Which servants carried trays like men who were watched, and which carried them like men who were told they were invisible. She adjusted the seating. At the high table by inches, the way a surgeon adjusts a bone, Brunhild did what she always did, listened. Not to the song, but to the silences where a name should have been, to the jokes cut short because a certain person had entered the room, to the way the steward's hand paused half a second too long over a dish that had been meant for someone else. She put 3 facts away for later. The pantry door's new hinge, a guard's new boots, a musician's old scar. The bride, bright as a torch, kept her eyes soft and her ears open. When Fredegund asked after her journey, the girl spoke of rivers and hills. When Brunhild asked after her heart, the girl spoke of gratitude. When neither queen asked, The girl watched the cupbearers, because this was a Fredegund banquet, and goblets were chess pieces, halfway through the toasts. The groom's uncle, an honest fool whose loyalty could be depended on when ale ran low, rose to praise both queens with a poem he had improved into shapelessness. The room laughed kindly. Fredegund lifted her cup. Across the table, a servant's wrist tightened in the smallest possible way. Brunhild saw it. Her fingers drummed once. The signal that meant now. A taster imported for the occasion under the polite title of cellarmaster glided forward, apologetic and slow, and asked leave to show off the vintage. He spoke of vines and rain and the way the barrel had been turned on the second month, as though faith depended on it. The room smiled. Fredegund's eyebrows lifted a fraction. She said nothing. The cellarmaster poured from a different flagon than the one on the table. The wine was fine. The moment passed. The servant with the tight wrist exhaled and nearly smiled. Then he looked toward a side door that should have been closed. It was, naturally, open. Eberalf stood in that doorway, large as a verdict. He had changed position twice during the meal. Once at Fredegund's tilt of the head, once at Brunhild's glance like a thrown pin. Now he did nothing. He folded his arms and learned the shape of the servant's face with his eyes. 2 queens, 2 nets, 1 fish. The fish pretended to be water. The banquet continued. Toasts rose, rings flashed. The bride's veil glowed like a good omen. But the tone had shifted by degrees only professionals admit to hearing. A plate was returned to the kitchens untouched. A bench was moved the width of a dagger. A speech grew shorter by 2 lines. When the music swelled again, everyone was happier than they had been 10 minutes before, which is to say, more alert at midnight. The couple was led out to a chamber that had been blessed 3 times by 3 priests who did not compare notes. The door shut. The cheering stuck to the ceiling a heartbeat longer than needed and then slid off. Fredegund and Brunhild found themselves alone at last, or as alone as 2 women can be in a palace with ears. "You sent a child," Fredegund said. "Not unkindly." "I sent a mirror," Brunhild said. "Not unkindly either. Look after her." Fredegund's eyes warmed by a degree that did not change the temperature of the room. "I will look at her," she said. "That is the point." "Peace, then," Brunhild said. Knowing peace was the lie both courts needed to repeat until it bought them time. "Peace," Fredegund said, "and let the lie sit." The morning after dawn found the city tired and proud. Bakers sold loaves with a new swagger. Stable boys bragged about the horses they had watered for queens. A tired priest slept on a bench like a man whose prayers had been counted and accepted. The bride smiled with that glazed, shell-shocked happiness all brides were the morning after diplomacy. Only the kitchens remembered the servant with a tight wrist. He had not reported for his shift. He had not gone home. A boy washing platters mentioned a man who smelled like almonds, and then remembered he did not know what almonds smelled like. The steward's face didn't change, but his list for the day grew teeth. By noon, the city's bridges were heavy with traffic astration wagons rolling east, Neustrian wagons rolling west, carpenters carrying ladders no one had ordered. On one bridge, a cart lost a wheel it had not meant to lose. A crate burst. Inside, millstones, Brunhild's favorite gift. On another bridge, a drover's stick thumped twice on a plank that sounded wrong. A mason frowned. By sundown, the plank had quietly been replaced. The peace held, the kind of peace that counts itself every hour, because it knows it is rented. Inside the palace. Fredegund received reports. Eberelf had shadowed the servant to a cellar to alleys. From the square, the cellar had contained exactly what a cellar should: a barrel, a broom, a sullen catand, one thing it should not: a hollow step. Inside the hollow, a package of powders that would never be mixed, a small purse of foreign coin, and a ring that looked like a cheap copy of something costly. "Do we hang someone?" the captain asked. "Not yet," Fredegund said. "We let him run. We want to see which house he believes will hide him." They let him run. He ran to a merchant's big door. It opened too quickly. That told Fredegund what she needed to know. The next morning, soldiers unrolled warrants with the soft force of silk. A merchant protested in 3 languages. A clerk wept before anyone asked him to. A hidden room yielded letters written with a tidy, foreign hand that talked about bridges and barrels and the polite fiction of peace. The letters did not bear a name. They didn't need to. Brunhild's reaction was immediate and elegant. She sent diplomats. They wore dark clothes and long faces and spoke sadly of misunderstandings. They did not deny everything. Denial is for amateurs. They admitted to concern and precaution, objects you can hold without being arrested. They asked for the merchant's fair treatment and a chance to examine the evidence with a priest in the room. They asked to see the bride. They smiled like sorrow. Fredegund nodded and promised process. Meanwhile, the merchant's accounts were quietly redistributed to suppliers who didn't write letters. The servant with the tight wrist vanished into a story no one would be able to tell the same way twice. When bridges become banners peace weddings, do not erase maps, they redraw them with finer pens. 2 months later, a bridge north of the wedding city collapsed overnight without witnesses. No one died. A convoy of grain turned around and went the long way. The price of bread rose 2 notches. Someone grumbled in a church. Someone else grumbled louder in a tavern. A day later, a third person shouted in a market about the difference between queens and widows and harlots. The guard removed him before the sentence could learn any more verbs. Fredegund did not send soldiers to the bridge. She sent stonemasons. And money. The bridge returned. The price of bread fell a notch. The tavern found its beer watered by accident, and that accident persisted all week. The market gossip learned the road to a different town was shorter than she remembered. Brunhild unblinkingly built her own bridge knot in wood. But in marriage between a petty kinglet and a useful count who liked verses but loved land, the wedding was quiet. The dowry was not. It cut a road through a valley Neustrians had relied on. Merchants changed routes the way rivers change course after a flood. Money followed. Where money goes, sermons go. Where sermons go, soldiers visit. Fredegund answered with tables and gifts. She hosted assemblies for men who liked to be called the realm when seated together. She reminded them where their daughters' dowries had come from. She reminded them what the treasury could do in winter. She reminded them, without saying it aloud, who had prevented a holy massacre during a baptism, who had fed the city in a panic, who had kept Chilperic's enemies from dividing his son like a loaf. It worked on most, the rest needed different. Music, the bishop who forgot to be afraid. There is always one cleric who believes. God has given him a mouth specifically to trouble queens. He was not from Ruang, he was not a Protextatus returning from exile. He was new a bishop, raised on Brunhild's side of the border and seasoned on his own slogans. He preached with his eyes open. He scolded like a man who liked the taste it left. At first his homilies were about greed in general, cruelty in general, scenes that didn't have addresses. Then, slowly, his nouns found nouns to sit beside. Some rulers wield fear as if it were wisdom, he said one Sunday. People nodded. Some women confuse cunning with justice, he said the next. People nodded harder. Some courts keep goblins in their goblets, he tried. And the sacristan coughed so loudly the bishop smiled and chose a different G word. Listened as if his sermons were weather reports. He was a test. If she broke him fast, she would snap the patience of the city. If she left him alone, he would grow. She did the third thing, the thing people call cunning when they dislike the person doing it. She sent him money for the poor, wood for the roof, books for the library, and a summons. A trial was arranged, churchman judging a churchman, in a hall that belonged to a crown. The bishop arrived in plain robes, with a plain face that said he didn't have to win. He only had to be seen losing properly. He argued scripture. Lawyers argued law. A clerk read aloud a list of sentences that sounded like he had swallowed a beehive. The queen did not attend. Her absence filled the room like a tide. The verdict was not dramatic. It was exile to a quiet abbey in a quiet valley with a quiet view of a quiet river. The bishop bowed to the idea of authority and walked out with the idea of audience. Fredegund let him go. She could afford a pious man learning the dictionary definition of silence. Brunhild, of course, sent letters to 3 abbeys and 1 saint. The bishop found his new monastery better supplied than most kingdoms. Exile with honey is still exile. The city judged the whole affair as cities do by the price of bread the next morning. It did not change. People went back to counting their own sins, but the bishop was a seed. Seeds have patience. The stared Umbi, the time the wedding's candles had burned to nubs, and the newlyweds had learned which words soothe which ghosts. The 2 queens had measured each other properly. Brunhild, law, ledgers, alliances that last longer than ale. Fredegund, knives, rumors, generosity deployed like cavalry. Both, time. Did she blink? The captain asked the queen one night, meaning. Brunhild, no, Fredegund said. Neither did we. That's why the room is colder. Colder is good. Colder is clearer, she said, and showed him a map with bridges drawn thicker than borders. The next move would not be a wedding or a bridge. It would be a face and a voice returning to a city that had learned to keep its breath shallow, because seeds sprout and exiles write sermons in their sleep. Some Sunday soon, a bishop would step into his old pulpit with hands that shook, a heart that didn't, and a cup that might taste wrong. The choir would start the wrong verse and correct itself. The people would murmur, and the queen would decide whether mercy or medicine would keep the peace. A seed doesn't look like much until the ground suddenly remembers it. Weeks after the peace wedding and the tidy arrests, Stepsons woke up to a rumor with legs. The exiled bishop, the one who had tried to turn sermons into spears, was coming back. Not sneaking back, invited back, the rumor said. Pardoned by the queen for the sake of harmony, mercy. The captain asked, blinking as if the word stung. Stagecraft, Fredegund replied. If he preaches because I let him, he preaches on my day. She meant to choreograph every inch. The bishop would step over her threshold, bless her child, and leave with a purse for the poor big enough to feel like gratitude. The city would see a generous crown, a tamed tongue, and a queen who could afford to be magnanimous dot across the border. Brunhild read the same rumor and sent a small, neat letter to a priest in Stepsons. When the door opens, do not kneel too quickly. She also wrote to her newly married granddaughter, now a respectable ornament in Neustria. But more importantly, a set of eyes with excellent manners. Learn the bishop's hour. Watch the cup. Entrance managed the bishop, arrived on a grey morning that smelled like wet wool and old incense. He came without banners, wearing travel dust, and an expression that said he was prepared to lose politely. The crowd loved him instantly. Men cheered for the possibility of a spine in a cassack. Women made the sign of the cross like they were signing a petition. Fredegund received him in a small hall that pretended to be private. Clotho gurgled on a chair like a tiny, irrelevant son. The bishop bowed. The queen inclined her head, the exact height a person lowers it when they're letting you keep your pride as a party favor. "Welcome home," she said. "Our streets are calmer when our churches are busy." "Your Majesty," he answered, and if the words carried a pebble of irony, he kept it in his pocket. They spoke about roofs and alms and plague-safe nuns until a page brought a tray with 2 cups and a careful, bland wine. "Drink," Fredegund offered. Not a command. An invitation with teeth filed smooth. The bishop's fingers brushed the stem. He paused just long enough for the room to inhale. He lifted the cup to his mouth, then set it down untouched, and smiled the kind of smile that looks like forgiveness. "If you squint, after the blessing," he said. Old habit. Fredegund's eyes did not flicker, which told the bishop exactly what he needed to know. Either the cup was safe, or it was a test he had passed by refusing. Stagecraft indeed. Preach. The queen said, "Give them a psalm that ends before sundown." He bowed again. "I shall give them a mirror." The pulpit opens its mouth. The cathedral filled as if the walls had been taught to breathe people in. The bishop mounted the pulpit. He did not shout. He did not name names. He dragged words slowly through the air like a net and let the city swim. Into it, peace, he said, is not what happens when knives are sheathed. Peace is what happens when no one needs knives to begin with. Heads nodded. A woman cried. A money-changer scratched his ear and tried to remember whether he had raised his prices that morning. Some rulers, he went on, believe fear is a bridle. It is not. It is a bit. It makes the horse foam, not obey. Somewhere in the nave, a guard shifted his weight. On the south aisle, a young bride from Austrasia dropped her eyes and counted footsteps in the transept. "I bless the child," the bishop said, voice softening. "I bless his sleep and the hand that rocks him." A long pause, deliberate as a drawn bow. "May that hand be guided by wisdom more than cunning." A murmur, the kind you hear when a whole room decides it has understood something at once. He ended before sundown. The crowd exhaled, then inhaled, then tried to decide whether they were braver now or merely edgier. Fredegund did not intervene. She did not need to. She had already written the afternoon's script. Alms at the church doors. Deliveries of grain to the worst quarters. A public gift to the hospital. People who are chewing do not riot well, but stagecraft hates improvisation, and Merrivick shaved, furious. Not gifted with patience, had escaped again. Sanctuary, he reached the cathedral at dusk, a shadow knocking on shadow. Blood on his sleeve, sweat like pennies. 2 novices tried to bar the door. He pushed through them with an apology and a grin and fell against the choir screen. "Sanctuary," he gasped. By God and custom, the bishop stared at him as if the square of sky above the abbey cell had fallen to the floor. Then he made the worst good decision of his year. He nodded. "Sanctuary is a promise made of wood and habit. Break it, and churches stop being churches. Keep it, and kings stop being kings." The bishop had just drawn a line on the floor and stepped onto the dangerous side. News outran horses again. By full dark, the cathedral steps were a conversation. Soldiers lined the square. Citizens clustered, whispering prayers that sounded like bets. In a second-floor window, the Austrasian bride's candle made a small, brave star. Fredegund arrived on foot, not in a litter message received. "I am close to earth." She did not shout. She spoke like someone ordering dinner. "Hand him over." She told the bishop. "He is a rebel." "He is a son," the bishop replied, as if that settled anything. "And a sinner, which is to say, ours." Fredegund's mouth made a line you could build a road with. "Sanctuary is for souls, not wars. Every war is a soul's business," he said gently, which is the kind of sentence that makes soldiers itch. They argued with courtesy sharp. Enough to shave hair. The crowd swayed. The queen took half a step up the cathedral stairs. The bishop took half a step down. One more half for either, and the world would have to choose. Fredegund chose process. "Then let there be a trial," she said. "Not at midnight with a mob. Tomorrow, in the light, before God and men." The bishop understood the trap. Reject the trial and look like a lawless priest. Accept it and walk into a room where the queen owned the doors. He accepted he had. 2. Sanctuary buys nights, not futures. Merovic slept in the sacristy, the only man in the building allowed to snore. The bishop lay awake and counted the ways decency becomes strategy in someone else's mouth. The trial the hall was packed with men who wanted to be remembered accurately by the future. Fredegund did not preside. She attended another kind of power. The charges were read in Latin that pretended to be neutral. The bishop's advocate quoted Augustine as if a church father could be subpoenaed. Witnesses spoke of doors and hours and the fact that Merovic's face made people braver than they had intended. Then the queen's clerk, the one with the waxy memory, read a short list of namesmen who had raised talk when they should have raised roofs. He did not look at Brunhild's bride. He did not need to. Verdict: exile again, for the bishop this time for inciting unrest under cover of sanctuary. The crowd murmured. The bishop bowed to the geometry of power. Merovic was remanded to royal custody for the safety of the realm. Safety, that wonderful word that can be shaped into any weapon. The bishop left the hall walking, head up, guts on fire. The queen gave him a purse for the poor, as if she were applauding a performance she enjoyed. The city sagged like a tent whose ropes had been loosened. The road that didn't end 2 days into exile. Under a sky that couldn't pick a color, riders appeared where no riders had been. They came with faces you forget instantly and skill you don't. They parted the escort like competent wind, lifted the bishop onto a fresh horse, and were gone by the time someone remembered to shout. The lead rider wore no insignia. The bishop caught a glimpse of a ring on a glove, too fine for a mercenary, too plain for a peacock. He heard the rider laugh once, softly, at the absurdity of being efficient. Brunhild does not always send letters. Sometimes she sends solutions. The bishop vanished into a chain of abbey guest rooms, barns and cellars that had been waiting for him since the first time he had said the wrong right thing. He wrote 2 letters and burned them both. He slept with his boots on. He counted his mistakes. And then, because seeds sprout, he turned around. The return he chose his day like a professional feast. When crowds gather without being told and guards are distracted by piety, the city woke to bells that sounded innocent. By tears, the cathedral had filled itself again. Fredegund received the news in the treasury, where light is always dimmer and choices always clearer. Again, the captain asked, half admiring, half exhausted. "Let him speak," she said. "If we silence him twice, we adopt his sermon as our motto." She sent extra oms to the doors. She repositioned to squads to look like decoration. She told Eberelf to be a wall with ears. The bishop mounted the pulpit. He carried no paper. His voice had learned something since exile, not louder, but steadier. He praised the charity at the doors. He blessed the child by name. He told the city that fear wears a crown poorly and that justice sleeps badly with knives under the pillow. He stopped, reached for the cup beside the pulpit, lifted it, and this time Dash drank. The crowd swayed forward, the way people lean toward the mouth of a story. A string snapped on a psaltery. A bird darted through sunlight near the apse. Somewhere a baby laughed, as if on command. The bishop set the cup down. He put both hands on the wood, as if holding the city in place. "This is not Rome," he said quietly. "This is your neighbor's roof. If it leaks, you fix it before the rain." Simple words, dangerous ones. At that exact moment, a sound like a wasp butt heavier cut the air. For a heartbeat, no one understood. Then the bishop's body understood for them. He staggered, a dark blossoming on his shoulder. The second arrow found his ribs before anyone had finished the first scream. He fell sideways into the arms of two cannons who aged 10 years in a blink dot. Chaos is a language this city now speaks fluently. People surged. Guards surged back. The choir lost the melody and found a prayer. The shooter where? A window, a cornice, the roof, a ghost. Eberelf was already moving, shoving through a tide, eyes dragging the rafters for angles. The captain cursed architecture. Fredegund did not move at all, which is how men learned a new definition of stillness. The bishop, dying as slowly as the arrows would allow, found his voice one last time. He said a word no one agreed on later. Some swore it was mercy. Others swore it was a name. A few those who needed an enemy they could point to said it was Queen. He exhaled. A city inhaled knives. Fredegund closed her eyes for the length of a blink. When she opened them, the plan she had written for today was ash. A martyr had been minted on her doorstep. The price of bread would not move this time. Only soldiers would. Across the border, Brunhild would hear the news and smile without showing teeth. You can lose a bishop and win a city. Fredegund stepped forward at last, lifted the bishop's fallen cup, and raised it before the crowd. "No more blood," she said, and heard how that sounded like a promise or a challenge, depending on whether you feared her or needed her. Outside, bells clanged as if scolding heaven. Inside, men reached for swords they had promised not to. Draw in church. The Queen's captain waited for an order he would hate obeying. The bride in the side window blew out her candle with fingers that didn't tremble. Eberelf pointed there and 3 guards sprinted toward a stair that had never mattered until now. On a rooftop somewhere between God and rumor, a man with a bow already belonged to a different story. The arrow's echo hadn't finished, crawling up the nave before Soissons began to choose sides. Half the city swore the shooter had godless hands. The other half swore those hands wore rings. Everyone agreed on one thing. A bishop bleeding at the foot of the pulpit is a match you cannot step on fast enough. Fredegund moved first. She didn't. How? She organized. The cathedral doors became gates to a military camp. Ropes, barricades, watchposts, runners. a cordon thrown around stone and rumor alike. She pulled the choir boys out before some angry man mistook a white surplice for an easy target. She sent for the hospital, then sent for more hospital. She sent for the city's bell ringers and told them to ring plainly, one long note for sorrow. None of the panicked peals had turned grief into riot. The captain wanted arrests. "Round up 10, he said, "and the 11th will name the shooter." "Round up pay for the bakeries," Fredegund said. "Feed the square." Thinking on an empty stomach breeds martyrs faster than arrows do. Eberalf came back from the roof with 3 facts and a bruise. Fact 1. The shooter had hands like a saddler, quick and sure. Fact 2. The shot came from a blind angle only a local would know, or someone who studied a map meant for masons. Fact 3. A feather from the fletching wasn't from any fowler. Insouciance, it belonged to a Burgundian goose. Useful, not enough. Suggestive. Yes, by sunset the bishop was a body, the cathedral was a story, and the city was a fuse. In the palace, Clotha slept through it all, proving that infants and empires share one talent. They'll close their eyes on any disaster if tired enough. Across the border, Brunhild received the news, sitting at a table whose legs were steadier than most men. She didn't hide her satisfaction. She hid something better timing. "We weep," she told her scribes, "and we convene a synod." Bishops love the smell of righteous paperwork. If Neustria had accidentally acquired a martyr, Austrasia would define him. She wrote 3 letters that same night to the Pope, asking for condolences with teeth, to her generals, asking for readiness without banners, and to her granddaughter in Neustria, asking for the kind of details a bride sees and a queen pretends not to. What color were the cupbearer's sleeves? That's not a question about sleeves. The funeral and the bill. Fredegund staged the bishop's funeral like a state weddinger, spectacle of sorrow harnessed to the crown's wagon. Clergy processed. Poor men carried candles paid for by the treasury. Women keened in keys that sounded sincere because the bread they had eaten at the doors last night had been sincere too. The queen walked bareheaded, a concession that cost her nothing and bought her an afternoon of whispers about humility. Then she paid the bill for the day. She'd just bought stipends to the cathedral, promises to rebuild its roof in better oak, a dowry for an orphaned niece the bishop had raised. Generosity at scale is propaganda with receipts, but the arrow had written a sentence she couldn't erase. Widows were at war, now one cloaked in charity, the other in law, both fluent in the politics of funerals. The first season of Raid's War did not arrive as a trumpeted siege. It arrived as absence. Grain that should have reached a river town never did. A mile of road that had been safe turned up with a new ditch in the wrong place. 6 oxen went missing on the same night near 3 different villages, as if wolves had learned to ride. Fredegund answered absence with presence. Patrols doubled. Way stations sprang up like mushrooms, stocked with oats, bandages, and questions. A new levy swelled the army farm boys, who could march and not ask why the road zigged today where it had zagged yesterday. She paired each green. Levy with a veteran who spoke the dialect of survival. "Eat your bread before it eats you," the old men told the young. "Sleep where the wind has already blown," they said, meaning don't make a fire where the smoke will tell a border. "Scout your mother's name." Brunhild struck where ledgers hurt. A charter discovered itself showing a market's tolls owed to Austrasia, not Neustria. A monastery that had blessed a Neustrian victory last spring suddenly remembered a Burgundian donor from 2 winters back. You can move armies. you can also move ink. When Fredegund sent soldiers to fix a bridge, Brunhild sent masons to finish another 2 valleys away. If you can choose where wagons cross, you can choose where rumors rest at night. Men who sleep under your bridge wake with your opinions. Merowik ends Neustria. Meanwhile, still had a loose blade. Merowik, a prince who survives too many escapes, becomes a reason more than a person. Fredegund asked the obvious question with the coolness of someone asking for a ledger. What will he cost if he breathes? And received the obvious answer, more than we can pay. The official story came as a parchment folded around a euphemism. In a cell kept for his safety, Merowik fell into despair and took his own life. The ink dried, fast. The city swallowed the phrase, the way a man swallows a fish boned carefully, with a hand on his throat. In private, the guards said little and drank more. In public, the court judged with the tools courts always use: convenience and fatigue. A problem had stopped making noise. That's policy enough for most regimes. Brunhild read the notice and set it beneath a candle's edge until the wax threatened to fall. Then she blew the candle out. "Tell the bishops to name it what it is," she said to a scribe. Murder of a son. She knew the word would land like thunder in houses where mothers had held boys who did not come home. Clothers, lessons war taught Clother before tutors did. He learned how to be silent when men with boots debated his future within earshot. He learned that a map is a picture of who will eat and who will write to complain about not eating. He learned that his mother's smile meant yes, no, or maybe, depending on how tired her eyes were. He practiced counting on the backs of coins. Head, tail, head. Tail kings live in a world that asks the same question over and over. Which side will show when the metal lands? At night, Fredegund told him bedtime stories with morals sharp enough to shave. A promise is a rope. Tie it to your own door, not your neighbor's. A gift is a leash. Hold the other end. Names are knives. Don't hand yours. To a stranger, he would not remember the sentences. He would remember the tone. The bride turns, mirror. The Austrasian bride at court did what she had been told. Be lovely, be diplomatic, be eyes. She watched cupbearers, corridors, and witch guards. Admired witch tapestry too long. She sent Brunhild letters that read like fashion and felt like maps. Fredegund read the girl's face, the way a poacher reads tracks. She didn't pluck the spy from the garden. She watered her. She let the girl overhear a future plant troops. To be mustered at a village by a ford. Supplies staged under a barn with a blue door. A captain whose loyalty might wobble in the rain. The letter flew east like a red kite. Brunhild moved to catch it. A column slid toward the ford on a schedule that made sense if the barn existed. It didn't. What did exist was a marsh masquerading as a meadow and 3 companies of men with rope and patience. When the first Austrasian horses bogged to their bellies, Fredegund's men began the kind of fight that looked like mercy compared to drowning. When it ended, the marsh was quiet and loyalty had learned a lesson. Neustria lies. 2. Brunhild did not scold her granddaughter. She sent the girl a necklace and a note that said, "Well tried. Learn to read silence next." Propaganda with banners bishops on Brunhild's side painted the dead cleric with halos before the blood dried. Processions wound through towns with candles and complaints. A song appeared in border markets, a widow's knife and a widow's psalm. Which one keeps the children calm? Which one buys the winter bread? Which one leaves your bishop dead? Fredegund answered with work. Roads flattened. Fairs reopened under watchful eyes and generous tariffs. Soldiers who had been paid late under the old king were paid ahead. When a town's mill burned under suspicious circumstances, a new wheel turned 3 weeks later. That is a sermon people remember. Flower. Steel in the open eventually, the raids. And bridges and songs gave way to the honest stupidity of battle. Not a grand one to end a chronicle, but a muscular, miserable clash on a plain that would be a field again next summer. Brunhild's general chose the ground flat, wind in the face of Neustria's line, a brook behind to tangle a retreat. Fredegund chose the hour late enough for the Austrasians to sweat in their armor, early enough for her own men to see the sun where it didn't blind them. The fighting was everything war always is: noise, prayer, and the astonishing speed with which a brave man becomes a problem for his friends to carry. Twice the Austrasian left nearly broke the Neustrian right. Twice Eberalf pushed a reserve into the seam, like a wedge that insisted wood is just a suggestion. A gust kicked dust across the field at the hour when men discover whether they prefer glory to water. Through it, a Neustrian horn called a feigned retreat on one flank. Austrasians bit. The line bent. A pocket formed. In that pocket, a Burgundian captain fell and took his banner with him. Someone shouted saint. Someone else shouted salary. And the second shout held by dusk, the plains smelled like iron and onions. The field did not belong to either. Queen, it belonged to exhaustion. Fredegund called her men back on purpose, not because she had to. She had proved what she needed. Neustria would not be eaten without breaking the predator's teeth. Brunhild's letters that week were pure steel. "We are not done," she wrote. "We exchange a spring for an autumn and charge interest." The net Titans Fredegund returned to Soissons and gave the city something better than triumph. She gave it order. Curfews without cruelty. Patrols that said good evening. Courts that ran on time because late justice is rumour's favourite aunt. She did not forget the bishop. She named a day of arms in his memory and let the sermons do the rest. You can't beat a martyr. You can budget him. But the arrow had taught her a lesson she would not misfile. Hierarchies cracked from the roof and the basement at the same time. She tightened the guards and the gossip. She replaced 2 cupbearers, 3 doorkeepers, and the man who trimmed the palace's lamps because he hummed the wrong tune under his breath. And songs tell you which border a man dreams of. She sent a gift to a monastery that did not deserve it, and a quiet fire to a barn that did. Then autumn rolled in with its noise of geese and taxis. Cold has a way of making bad ideas shiver into good ones. Brunhild pulled back her raiders to winter quarters that looked like altars to planning. Fredegund pulled in her captains and spread maps like blankets. "What now?" the captain asked, tracing a dirty finger along a road newly repaired. "Now we starve ambition," Fredegund said softly. "Not with famine, with patience. Winter." He said, like a curse and a promise. "Winter," she agreed. Of iron, in a corner, Clotha stacked 3 wooden soldiers on the back of a carved horse and watched them wobble. He didn't know the word regency. He knew balance. On a shelf, a folded letter waited with a seal Fredegund had not broken yet. It had travelled far to arrive here and carried news that would do what no general had: cut the Queen's year in half. The hand was familiar. The tone she could almost feel it through the wax was not. The seal was the colour of dried cherries. The hand was familiar. The tone was not. To Fredegund, Queen and Mother, I do not write as a neighbour today, but as a man whose mornings are fewer than his memories. The doctors flatter me with hot wine and small lies. I will waste neither on you. When I am gone, the cloth between your boy and the wolves will be thinner than a monk's sleeve. Make him iron before the thaw. Guntram, King of Burgundy, she read it twice, once as a threat, once as a kindness, and let the wax cool her. Thumb, Guntram had been many things: rival, shelter, weather vane. If he was truly failing, Brunhild would not wait for the ground to soften. She folded the letter into the shape all bad winters take, and pocketed it next to the keys of the treasury. Change of plan, she told the captain. We were going to spend the cold months counting grain. We will spend them counting men, raising levies, he asked. Raising habits, she said, and strangling the ones that don't feed us. Iron measures winter, put its thumb on, soisons and pressed. Frost took the edges off roofs and men. The river slowed to a sulk. Bread had to be measured, not given. The queen called the steward, the bakers, the millers, and the men who liked to discover loopholes and weights. She brought out new tallies, split sticks with the crown's notch cut down their length. One half lived with the baker, one with the exchequer. If you shaved your half, the other told the truth. Loaves had to weigh as much in fear as they did in flour. Stamp the knives, she ordered. Bakers received small iron blades whose handles wore the king's infant seal, a lily, and a wolf's head. If a loaf is cut with a different knife, she said, I will consider my patience trimmed with it. She issued an edict of salt and fire, 3 pages no one wanted to love. Salt could not leave the city without permission. Firewood was crown property until measured and allotted. Any soldier caught buying warmth before an old woman did would learn the price of irony in the stocks. She sent men with shaved heads and warm hearts to build way stations along the border roads, sheds with oats, bandages, and blankets. A rider who slept warm would not invent a rebellion to pay for it. She hired Crowsnot the birds, the men who carry messages with faces that memory refuses to hold. They learned the winter paths like rosaries, and because winter makes cities cruel to themselves, she doubled the watchers. A hungry quarter will smash a bakery on a rumor. A second line of spears gives rumor something more interesting to look at. Smoke through keyholes. Brunhild did not send armies. She sent documents that made roads bend on parchment, and then, somehow, in life, a charter surfaced at a border abbey claiming that one market town's tolls belonged to the Diocese of Metz in perpetuity. A burgess in a river city opened his chest to pay the king's tax and found Austrasian coin instead of Neustrian. I swear by St. Martin, he cried, this is the same purse I filled. That's a trick you don't learn in an afternoon, she added piety to paperwork. A synod in Reims that named the dead bishop a confessor of truth and truths. Enemies, wolves in silk. She sent the decisions to Rome with incense and a gift list that read like a shopping trip for a small church. Rome writes slowly in winter. News does not. Fredegund read the synod decrees and smiled the way a cat smiles at a rain barrel. Let them crown their martyr, she said. We will feed his widows. She timed a bread dole for the feast day the synod had chosen to sing about. In his memory, her stewards cried in the squares, and the poor ate what they would have eaten anyway, and learned a new association. A bishop's name tastes like grain. The supper of Wulf's the letter from Guntram chewed at the edges of her sleep. If Burgundy's king died before the thaw, Brunhild would throw more than sermons. Fredegund felt for the weak wool in her own blanket, household knights who had grown too comfortable with taverns. a chamberlain whose accounts sang in an Austrasian key, 3 minor lords who met in a bathhouse to keep warm. She invited them to a winter supper, small, intimate, all the ways men like to pretend a queen is their friend. The courses were plain and hot, the wine not too strong. She kept the talk on weather and children. Men lie less when the nouns are humble. At the 4th cup, she raised a toast to Saint Remigius and the miracle of coats. Servants moved behind chairs like thoughts. A candle guttered and returned in blue. The chamberlain blinked. The captain did not. The powder she'd stolen from an alchemist picked up oils invisible to lazy eyes. 2 of the goblets glowed, a whispering azure. "We have overpolished," the steward said smoothly, collecting them. "Forgive us." No one drank what they had meant to serve someone else. After the almond cakes, the queen told a story about a wolf who walked like a man. Her voice was pleasant. The moral had knives. By morning, 2 household knights discovered a love of the frontier and galloped toward it with a purse and an escort. The chamberlain went home to his new estate in a valley that came with beautiful views and a garrison. The bathhouse developed a draft. Eberalf delivered 1 warrant himself. "You shared my bread," the man protested as he was led away. "I still remember the taste," Eberalf said, and hated the truth of it. The nurse and the scent winter steals. Sound. Plots prefer winter. One night, the nursery door breathed open and shut with a courtesy that didn't belong to doors. The nurse rose, sensed nothing new, and sat again. An hour later, a second nurse arrived with a pot of milk and an apology for being delayed in the kitchen. She said, "Too fast." Fredegund's powder lived in other rooms too. A lamplighter had brushed a touch of it along the lintel that week. Under lamplight, the trace turned violet where oiled leather touched it. "Stop," Fredegund said, each letter made of cold iron. The second nurse froze where she stood. She did not cry. Good. Crying ruins interviews. They found the bone needle in her sleeve, and the tiny bottle that smelled of bitter pits. They found nothing in her eyes except resignation. "If I die," she whispered, "my brothers eat. You have been paid once," the queen said. "Let them eat again, far from here." The next morning, a woman with no name was seen riding out with a cart full of flour and a guard who had orders not to learn anyone's stories. Letters that melt maps midwinter brought a messenger whose horse's breath looked like the steam of hell. He brought 2 letters. One from Burgundy, one from the Pope's legate. The first was short. "The king is dead, Vizier of Shalonder." Second was long and very Roman. The synod's phrases arrived gilded with Latin. Grave scandal, temporal. Overreach, demanded inquiry. The legate begged the queen to submit to a hearing in spring. He sent a ring to Golden Glassman to look like authority. "Guntram is gone," the captain said softly. "Good men keep the world predictable," Fredegund said. "He was a good man, and Rome writes on water and calls." "It's stone," she said. "We will nod and build a bridge." The news from Burgundy halved her winter. The old balance tipped. Brunhild's son now, older, bolder, would lean into the vacancy like a man at a bar. Burgundy's lords would fan out like sparks, seeking dry thatch. The queen stopped rationing patience. She wrote to 3 border castellans, "Open your gates to my couriers. Close them to everyone else." She wrote to a Burgundian widow who had liked pearls when she visited Neustria. The letter contained a list of very small, very expensive gifts and a sentence. "You once admired my son's eyelashes. Come, admire them again. She wrote to Rome as if Rome were a friend who had lost a war. We share sorrow for a bishop. We will host your hearing in summer. In the meantime, our granaries are open. Pray for us as we feed the poor you love. Rome enjoys the sound of its own patience. Clother in the forge, the boy watched winter do what tutors could not. Men came to the palace with hats in hand and words on their tongues. He learned to hold still through long oaths and longer lists. He learned that a woman could make a city behave with a ledger and 2 spears. He learned to sit a horse at a walk, on ice and not look down. He learned that when his mother's voice dropped, someone's year got shorter. At night, she did not tell him of saints. She told him of locks. A lock is a promise you make to yourself, she said, winding a chain round the chest they slept beside in the treasury. A key is your memory of where you put it. He asked where she put hers. In here, she said, touching her temple, and in people. The ruin in candlelight Brunhild, feeling the Burgundian vacuum like a stepping stone underfoot, tried winter's favorite trick. Pilgrims. A caravan filed toward Neustria, with relics the arm of a saint who had healed a king's fever 200 years ago. A tooth wrapped in silk. A vial of tears that looked like honey with better publicity. People parted for bones. Fredegund let them in. She put soldiers in cloaks to walk beside the procession and praised their piety. The relics entered the cathedral. The city felt holy for a night. That night, under that cover, 4 men tried a door near the palace's larder. The door opened into a room full of lamplight and very awake men. Your timing is excellent, Eberalf said, stepping from behind a tapestry whose pattern he had learned in the first week he ever wore a sword. We were worried the saint had lost his way. 2 of the men ran into spears. One tried a window and discovered how little glass forgives. The 4th tried to talk and discovered how little Fredegund does when the sentence begins. We were. Only, the next morning, the relics processed out again. The people waved. The queen sent a sack of grain to a basilica, and a sack of silver to the widow of a lamplighter who had not been quick enough on a stair. The Iron Feast War wastes talent on men who prefer noise. Winter wastes nerves on men who prefer sleep. Fredegund saw both happening and chose a day near the end of the cold that felt like a hinge. She ordered a feast. Rich, not starved. Enough meat to remind the city that it was still a city. Enough rules to remind it that it was still hers. At the high table, she placed 3 lords who had been drifting like boats with loose moorings. She tied them, a marriage. Promise here, a debt forgiven there. A title whose duties were mostly to be seen doing them. She had Clother lifted onto a stool to be stared at. Children like being stared at until they don't. He did well. He nodded when men said sire, as if he had been hearing it all his life. During the 3rd course, a messenger slid close, like a modest cat with a mouse. He put a sealed note beside. The queen's plate had made himself the size of a prayer. She did not open it at the table. She finished the course. She smiled at jokes. She flicked 2 fingers, and a cupbearer realized what water is for. Then she excused herself without excusing herself and stepped into the narrow green room between 2 tapestries. The seal, wax pale as fat. The hand, clean, right slanted. The tone, urgent and worse affectionate. Mother spies, swear to me that Brunhild rides not for spring but for Easter. She will pray with an army and call it penance. Our cousin in Burgundy has been promised a half-kingdom for a half-betrayal. Eberalf is loyal. Others are loyal to the last man who fed them. I am learning to be iron. A friend who sits 3 seats from your chair. She knew the hand. The bride. So the mirror had learned to write backwards. Fredegund went back to the hall with a face that did not tell children. It had read bad bedtime news. She touched Ebraf's arm as she passed. "We will talk," she said, which is how queens say don't sleep. The feast ended early. People went home with bellies that believed in tomorrow. The queen went to the chapel where winter holds its breath longer. "Make him iron," Guntram had written. She laid the burgundy letter beside the bride's and pressed a palm to the stone. It held the cold, like a thought you haven't dared yet. She did not pray for victory. She prayed for clarity. On the way back, a cough caught her. The way bad weather catches a roof. She wiped her lip and studied the smear on her glove as if it were a heraldry she could edit. She put the glove in the fire without fuss and warmed her fingers over the hiss. "Captain," she said when she reached the map room, "wake the city. Gently. We move before Easter." "To where?" he asked. "To the place she must pass if her prayers are to be witnessed," Fredegund replied. "We will make the road a sermon." He nodded. He'd learned the liturgy of this court. The queen bent over the map. In the doorway, Clotha watched her trace a valley and an inn and a hill that had seen too many men become saints by accident. He did not understand what ambush meant yet. He understood waiting. Outside, the last hard frost of the year pinned the world in its place. Inside, iron warmed. The thaw arrived like a rumor you can finally believe. Snow pulled its fingers off. The hedges, the road between the inn, the ford, and the hill changed from iron to mud, which is to say, from certainty to choice. Fredegund chose for everyone. She emptied the farms along the approach. Pilgrims eat too much when they're armed, and moved the grain to 3 places at once, so no one could swear where it had gone. She set archers behind wattled hurdles that looked like unambitious fences. She posted slingers under hazels with pockets full of round, persuasive arguments. She told Eberelf to sit a company of men in a fallow field and look like cows. "Signal." "For me?" he asked. "Sing," she said. "If the hymn sounds wrong, I'll hear it." Easter's week began with bells and hoofbeats. From the east came Brunhild's procession relic banners, clerics, cooks, and a spine of lances threaded through the piety like wire through a rosary. The queens had agreed on a meeting for prayer. Brunhild had translated that into a show of force blessed by incense. Fredegund had translated it into a chess clock. The first surprise met Brunhild at the village before the ford. Nobody, doors barred, chickens absent. Even the dogs had found other work. A table had been left in the square with an empty bowl and a single neat note. "For alms, knock at the crown's door. For bread, wait by the river." The second surprise was the river itself. Spring had taught it the trick of widening. What had been an easy crossing was now a waist-deep decision no honest pilgrim would expect, and no wise general would love. Brunhild paused where a queen should center stage, flank guarded, banners forward. She studied the ford, the inn on the far bank, the hill that measured every man who tried to walk under it without guessing who watched. "Pretty," she said, almost to herself. "She scribed us with patience." "Shall we force it?" her captain asked, "because captains are songs with 2 verses." "Not today," she said. "Today we see what she cannot help but show us." Across the water, a rider appeared on the inn's porch with the posture of a man who knew he was expensive. He held a rod with a white cloth tied to it, and the kind of calm that comes from knowing the archers you can't see are yours. Fredegund rode out to the porch plain cloak. "Good horse, goblet left behind on purpose. She looked like someone the weather had taught to arrive on time. At a matching point on the opposite bank, Brunhild advanced until the river made both queens the same height. A respectful distance of water stood between them with opinions of its own. Peace, Brunhild called, because that is the first word widows learn to throw. Process, Fredegund answered, because that is the word that makes peace do its chores. They might have smiled in another life. In this one, they measured. You barred the houses, Brunhild said. I barred the thieves. Fredegund replied. You brought slingers to a prayer, Brunhild said. You brought cavalry too. A relic, Fredegund replied. The captains behind each watched the drift of cloud and tried to decide if it meant anything. Fredegund lifted a hand. A choir boys with clear throats and nerves of stringbeak, and a hymn from the inn's gallery. Thin and high, the kind of sound that turns edges soft. On the second verse, the melody tilted half a note, an error so gentle only a mother or a murderer would hear it. Brunhild did. Her eyes sparked. Archers, she murmured, to no one and everyone, and clever ones. Fredegund did not press. She was after something more useful than blood. Choice on record. You cross here, she said, you cross at my gate. Consent to a count of lances, and a pledge that the relics go forward and the points go back. We kneel together. We rise, agreeing that Neustria is not a road, it is a house. Brunhild could not afford to look managed. She also could not afford to feed the river with men on Easter week. She let silence sit like a chair, then sat in it. Just long enough to make it look like decision and not delay. I will not be counted like cattle, she said at last, letting the disdain carry but not spray. Nor will I drown a salter to prove I own a bridge. Then you will pray on the far bank, Fredegund said, and we will log your courtesy. Behind Brunhild, a priest began to fume in Latin. She put 2 fingers up, and the fumes turned into incense again. Another day, Fredegund, she called, sweet as vinegar, with summer roads, with witnesses who don't hide in hedges. Another day, Fredegund agreed, sweeter, when the river remembers who keeps its banks. Brunhild withdrew, in formation, no panic, no loss, only the acknowledgement that spectacles travel better on dry ground. But you don't win with a retreat, you win with a story. By nightfall, Austrasian campfires were telling one already. We came to pray. She brought traps. In Soissons, a different story had already been plated and served. We kept the peace. They brought spears. The same truth, cooked 2 ways. On the porch, Fredegund let herself breathe. The choir boys dissolved into the inn like minnows. Emerged from a fence and grinned in the way men do when they don't have to kill anyone before lunch. She blinked, he said. She planned not to blink, Fredegund answered. There's a difference. But yes, she left me the river. And rivers have memories. The cost of quiet victory like that doesn't ring bells. It lowers bloodshed and raises respect, which is the currency widows prefer when the treasury has too much of coin and too little of time. Time there it was. Coughing in her chest when she thought no one was looking. She hid it as long as she could. Queens are theatres. Illness is a stagehand who hates rehearsals. A week after the river standoff, Fredegund climbed the treasury steps slower than habit allowed. The steward pretended not to count her breath. The captain pretended not to watch how she held the banister. Clother, who had learned to read faces before letters, watched nothing and learned everything. That night she called a small council, captain, steward, bishop, a quiet one. the kind who believed God appreciated a tidy book. Eberelf and the nurse who knew how to make a room behave without moving a foot. "We are past the winter of iron," she said, voice even, "and into the spring of paper. Brunhild will send letters faster than arrows. We will answer with bread and oaths. Every town that took our grain will declare it publicly, and every priest who speaks on the bishop's feast will thank the crown first and the martyr second." "And the army?" the captain asked. "We keep it fed and boring," she said. "War breeds heroes. Boredom breeds loyalty." She handed out lists. Some were names to promote, the ones who had chosen caution without being asked. Some were names to move, not executions. Not yet, just colder outposts where a man can consider who pays for his boots. One list was only a single sentence: teach the boy to sign before he learns to speak too quickly. That night she wrote 3 letters in her own hand. "To Rome, we welcome your hearing in summer. Our granaries and roads will be open to your legate. In the meantime, please accept gifts for the poor in the name of the bishop whose blood we still scrub from our stones. Rome likes to be told what it will like. To a Burgundian widow, your sons are wise to wait. We can make their waiting profitable. Men who wait without profit invent reasons not to. To Brunhild, one river does not make a border. 2 women do not end a map. We will meet again with fewer banners and more laws. Sometimes you have to hang a mirror in your enemy's hallway." She sanded the ink, sealed the wax, and coughed into the silence after the seals cooled. The room with no statue spring unclenched. Work did its honest magic. Roads flattened. A bridge that had sulked all winter remembered it was wood, not drama. The city stopped waking to rumors and started waking to schedules. Fredegund woke later each morning. The nurse moved the candle closer during councils. The captain learned a new quiet, the one men adopt when the person who gives them courage is rationing her own. One afternoon, Clotho brought a little wooden knife his tutor had carved for him and asked the question boys ask when they finally realize the future has teeth. "Mother, when do I get a real one?" "When you know the last thing you will cut with it," she said. "What's a last thing?" he asked, with the cruelty of innocence. She smiled, and for the only time in our story, it was almost soft. "A knot no one else will untie for you." That evening she asked for water, not wine, and a priest who kept his voice small. She did not play a deathbed drama. She wrote down instructions no one could argue with because they were simple. Do not change all the doorkeepers at once. Pay soldiers before scribes. Bake more than you count. If Brunhild offers peace, weigh it in grain, not in songs. Remember what bridges are for, to cross, not to preen on. Then she asked the bishop to leave the psalms open by the bed. He chose the one about rods and staffs and valleys that carry shadows like debts. She listened as if she were revising a report. "Will the city love me?" Clotho whispered, clutching the wooden knife so tightly it left a line. In his palm, "No," she said. "It will obey you. And then, if you are efficient long enough, it will call that love." She slept, woke, signed to pardons and one warrant, adjusted the steward's figures with a fingernail, and then, without permission or spectacle, died in a bed that had seen more strategy than kisses. The court tried to weep properly. The city tried to decide what it felt. The bishop found the right verbs. Eberalf put his hand on a table and reassured it by existing. The captain set the watchers as if grief were a siegent. It is. They laid her in a church without statues of her. The nearest thing to a monument was a ledger balanced to the last copper and a pantry that did not get looted that week. Her enemies called her a knife. Her people called her the person who kept the bread boring. She would have liked the second more. The long blade's arc stories end where a heart stops. History does not. The last knife Fredegund sharpened wasn't steel. It was time disguised as a sun. Clotho II grew. He learned the edicts that begin with bread and end with borders. He learned to suffer praise without believing it, and insults without forgetting them. He learned the shape of peace made by tired men and the price of wars started by women, who read maps better than those men ever would. Years later, when the hair at his temples learned the color of winter and the word king finally fit his shoulders without sliding, he closed a circle his mother had drawn in chalk. They took Brunhild at last, not by sermon or skirmish, but by the slow arithmetic of betrayed alliances and the fatigue of a realm that wanted fewer headlines. She faced accusations like a fortress faces wind. She did not topple, she eroded. Her judges were men whose fathers had been raised on Fredegund's bread. Her execution was the kind history writes with too many adjectives: harsh, public, medieval, inevitable. The chronicles say horses and ropes. Prudence says the same with fewer nouns. What matters is the sentence. The boy raised in iron ended the widow raised on law. When news of Brunhild's end ran through towns like a cured fever, more than one old woman crossed herself and said aloud, to no one, the queen who loved knives finished the war with a bridle. That line isn't fair and isn't wrong. The epilogue she would have approved. There are no statues of Fredegund you can visit and read dates off of. If you want her monument, stand on a bridge that didn't fall, count your loaves, and ask yourself, who taught a city to prefer order to excitement? She began as a rumor in a laundry, and ended as a line in a ledger that outlived her. She seduced a king, maybe his sons, and definitely his court. She stabbed what needed stabbing and paid what needed paying. She made enemies into expenses and expenses into sermons. She understood that public love is a parade and public fear is a policy, and she chose the one that kept her child breathing. Her last knife was the one she didn't draw at the river, the one she planted in a boy's spine, the one named Patience. When the scribes finished their histories, Gregory scratching like a man bullied by his own adjectives, monks adding halos and frowns where the ink ran thin, one sentence kept refusing to behave. She died in bed. No heroics, no gory lesson, just a queen who forced chaos to use the door like everyone else.